came to win, to fight, to conquer, to thrive. I came to win, to survive, to prosper, to rise, to fly, to fly.
I wish today it would rain all day. Maybe that'll kinda make the pain go away. Try to forgive you for abandoning me. Praying, but I think I'm still an angel away. Angel away, yeah, strange in a way. Maybe that is why I chase strangers away. They got their guns out aiming at me, but I become near when they aiming at me. Me against them, me against enemies, me against friends. Somehow they both seem to become one. A sea full of sharks and they all smell blood. They start coming and I start rising. Must be surprising. I'm just unwinding. I went, thrive, soar, higher, 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 more fire.
If I can see it, then I can do it. If I believe it, there's nothing to it. I believe I can fly. To fly. To fly, to fly.
Look, everybody wanna try to box me in, suffocating every time it locks me in. Paint their own picture, then they crop me in. But I will remain where the top begin. Cause I am not a word, I am not a line. I am not a girl that can ever be defined. I am not fly, I am levitation. I represent an entire generation. I hear the criticism loud and clear, and that is how I know that the time is near. So we become alive when the time of fear, and I ain't got no time to spare. I cry my eyes out for days upon days, such to have a burning place behind me. But when you go hard, the names become Yanks. Yankee Stadium with Jay's and Kanye.
Get ready for it. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. I came to win. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. I came to win. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. I came to win. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. Get ready for it. I came to win, to fight, to conquer, to thrive. I came to win, to survive, to prosper, to rise, to fly. To fly. To fly, to fly. 5,600 minutes. How do you measure the life of a woman or a man?
In truth that she learned, on times that he cried, in bridges she burned, or the way that he died.
It's time now to sing out, but the story never ends. Let's celebrate, remember the year in the life of friends. Love, remember the love, remember the love, measuring love. Seasons of love, seasons of love. What you gonna do when your back's against the wall? How you gonna smile when it seems that hope is lost? Tell me what you gonna do when you need a little more grace. Hey, how you gonna respond when they try to test your faith? Hang on in there. Hang on in there. What you gonna do when your strength gets a little weak? What song will you sing when you're feeling incomplete? Tell me what you gonna do when you're trying to almost slip. What you gonna do when you seem to lose your grip? Hang on in there. Hang on. You got it, you got it, you got it, you got it. In there. In there.
Yo, you gotta hang when your back's against the wall. You gotta hang when it seems our hope is lost. See, God, my witness who holds you up, and in the process, he'll fill your cup. So I'm not worried, I'm not scared. I'm gonna trust like my bishop said. It's a message to the devil, he can have my faith, and we gon' make it by his grace.
Hang on in there. Hang on in there. You got it, you got it, you got it, you got it. In there. Hang on in there. Hang on in there. Hang on in there. You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter
but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out and move mountains. We gon' walk it out. Mountains, and I'll rise up. I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the wave. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. When the silence isn't quiet and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe, and I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. We gon' walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the wave. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. And I will rise 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the wave. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up. I will rise.
There was a belief that you could just go direct to the academics. That we now know that's not true.
We're learning a lot about the science of learning, and we're understanding that learning is social and emotional, and learning is also interactive. We can make learning happen because we know so much more about how it happens.
The science is overwhelming. Social and emotional learning is a booster rocket to all the things we already measure in our educational system. Achievement, graduation rate, post-secondary enrollment, attainment, attachment to the workplace, civic engagement.
We do big longitudinal studies which have shown children's functioning is tied to a set of key life outcomes 20 to 30 years later. They're not just academic outcomes, they're life outcomes.
As I started to spend more time with other business leaders, what I learned is that it wasn't just Accenture and it wasn't just consulting or technology companies. We have hundreds of thousands of very high-paying job opportunities, but nobody to fill them. If we can figure out a way to get the right skills and capabilities of students so that we don't have to create those skills in them, then our businesses will be more successful. So it's that simple.
From my experience in the United States military, it's something that we as leaders should encourage all of our communities to look at to see if it would be applicable for their young people.
It has to be done. The price for not doing it is too high.
I want school to be the place that's the most exciting place in America to be for kids and for adults alike. I want school to be the place of dreams, of excitement, of inspiration, of pursuit, of curiosity, of challenge, of community, of team building. We've got the moment. We now have to capitalize upon it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Commission Co-Chair Tim Shriver.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. I don't know who set me up to follow the Eastern Senior High School Choir, but what a performance. Let's hear it again for Heather Evans, who sang that "Rise Up." Rise like the day, right? Rise up in spite of the ache. Here we are. Welcome to the Aspen Institute's National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development's launch event on behalf of the Institute, its president, Dan Porterfield, its team of leaders led by Ross Weiner and Elliot Gerson and Jackie Jodel, on behalf of my co-chairs, Linda Darling-Hammond and Jorge Benitez, our honorary chair, the extraordinary Dr. James P. Comer, who I think just arrived. I thought I saw him come in. Dr. Comer, where are you? Please just wave your hand. There you are. Yep. Welcome. Welcome to a day when educators are claiming their role as the new architects of the promise of the future of this country. Welcome to the day when we are welcoming the voices of young people who are claiming their demand for a different kind of present. Welcome to the day when we are responding to the needs of families who are saying they want a more just, a more inclusive, a more joyful, a more purpose-filled education. We are here collectively to declare an end to a nation at division, a nation at fear, a nation at resentment, a nation at injustice. We are here to declare that we have heard a new voice, a new arising. It is the voice and arising of a nation at hope. It is the voices we have heard, some of us for 2 years, others for 20 or 50 or 70. Teachers, I want to teach both head and heart. Voices of parents, I want opportunity for my children, but I want caring too. Voices of business leaders, you heard just now. Teamwork, creativity, resilience, agency, those are the skills that matter in the workplace. Voices of left and right who agree that children grow when adults care. Voices of administrators who say schools are ecosystems, classrooms, community, culture, all must work together. Voices of scholars who say that brain and body and mind are one, that evidence matters. And maybe most importantly, voices of young people. We heard so many. Just a few quotes. From one, you don't really have to be mean. From another, I'm going to be the first. From another, age-old wisdom. Treat others as you want to be treated. From another, deep breaths are deep. From another, choose to include. From another, it takes a special person to know their true self. From another, in Cleveland, why can't we be free? We are here to announce not, however, just voices. We are here to announce a blueprint, and we are going to use that blueprint to make a new footprint. And here then are your recommendations consolidated from dozens of reports, dozens of authors, hundreds of listening sessions, thousands of pages in review. Here then are our recommendations. And if we could move to the next slide. First, set a vision. Set a vision and make it a vision about a new definition of success. Think of those two words, vision and success. Vision has to be done together. Success has to connote change. Recommendation 1, let's get together and make a change. Our own picture of success, our own vision for this commission, you might think, included, could we become a team? Could we become good problem solvers? Could we work together? Could we be nonviolent, even as slightly older than children adults? The answer to that, I believe, is yes, you have done it. Those of you who participated, congratulations. The picture of success, the vision of success of a team working together for change is evident in this room. Let's make it evident in every community in the country. Our second recommendation, the transformation is about learning settings so that they are physically, emotionally safe. This is about culture and climate. It's about agency and creativity. It's about making places challenging and safe. Yes, safe from violence, but also safe for self-expression. Children need both. Our third recommendation, a shift, a new focus for the way in which we teach, but also what we teach. We have to change instruction to teach the skills of the heart, teach the skills of the emotional life, teach the skills of relationship, teach gratitude, teach self-awareness, teach help-seeking, teach coping, teach purpose, teach children to care about what's important to care about, to join what's worth joining, and to change what needs changing. Teaching social and emotional learning is not about compliance. It's not about quieting voices. It's about allowing children, as we just saw on this stage, to use their voices to rise up in spite of the ache and create a different future. Our next recommendation has been summarized over the generations. Teachers should be experts in content and in children. Teachers should be expert in the information that children need and the inspiration that children need in order to learn it. There is no longer an either-or. We are calling for a new way of thinking about the preparation of the most important workforce in the country, our teachers. Calling on the generations of work of so many of you in this room, and again in particular, Dr. Comer's work that has challenged us for decades to make this change. Now is the time to bring it to life. Our next recommendation, some have called it, it takes a village. There is wisdom in short expressions. It does indeed take a village. And this recommendation calls for the alignment of youth-serving organizations, youth leadership and development organizations, families and schools. The age of an either-or there is over. Our next recommendation, perhaps the one that might be hardest to understand for some, but nonetheless perhaps one of the most important over the long term, new research paradigms, a new way of thinking and understanding to end the split between those who are interested in evidence and inquiry and evaluation and those who are interested in teaching and learning and growth. Practitioners and scholars need a new partnership that forever ends the division between the two so that we can learn as we teach, so that we can teach as we learn, and make scholarship and evidence the partner of teaching and learning. All in all, how do we think in this new language? What would equity sound like? Maybe an end to structured lovelessness. What would opportunity sound like? It might sound like the beginning of a chance for every child to feel that they matter. What would purpose sound like? It might sound like a school where children find the sound of the genuine within them, to quote the great Howard Thurman. And maybe as they find the sound of the genuine within them, they recognize it in others. Let me close, ladies and gentlemen, by saying that I believe that the age of either or is over. This is not either Republican or Democrat, red or blue, school or home, academics or SEL, classrooms or systems, skills or infusion, relationships or rigor. All of those are false dichotomies that do not live in the life of a child and do not have a place in the life of a school. We are in the era of both and. We are searching, a people all over this country, for a way to be whole, and we here declare that we have a vision for learning built on responding to that search and allowing, making, demanding that we give children the chance themselves to be whole. This change is not from Washington, it is from the nation. We sit here in Washington, D.C., but this is a report from the nation. It is a morally resolute commitment. It is practical. It is actionable. It is challenging the status quo. And more than anything, as the title suggests, it is about hope. We all belong to tribes, but tribes can be inclusive. We all belong to communities, but communities can welcome all children. We believe that hope is not just about some undisclosed future. We believe hope is a way of living, a disposition of the heart, a growth mindset, and a deeper intensity. Hope within can create hope among us, and hope among us, we believe, can create a different us. Now's the time. Some people have said, what about this title? It sounds funny. Why isn't it a nation with hope, or a nation for hope, or a nation in hope? Because we're all about getting at it. This is about a nation at hope. Let's get at it. Welcome to the launch. Thank you.
When children are born, their brains are not fully developed. The development of the brain actually continues into young adulthood. It is relationships and experiences that drive the development of the brain.
Turn to your table group and discuss this. Come up with a statement.
When we're able to combine social, emotional, affective, and cognitive development together, we are creating many, many more interconnections in the developing brain that enable children to accelerate learning and development.
If we walk into a classroom that's really informed by these principles, we'll see kids actively engaged in their learning.
What is this graph telling us?
They will be using critical thinking and problem solving. They will be putting ideas into action.
This one is much longer than the other one you were using.
And as they undertake these tasks, they're building both the social and emotional foundation, and they're also building cognitive abilities.
Today, we have a very big task in front of us, but it is a very positive and optimistic task.
Good morning, friends.
Because we now have a knowledge of how children become learners and the opportunity to create an education system that's informed by a knowledge of the developing brain.
So that's collaboration and compassion. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Patricia Kuhl.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a brain scientist, and I'm very interested in what makes human brains unique. One of the most important findings of the last decade in brain science is the power of the social brain and the role that it plays in thought and learning. I know this because I use a very expensive and very big machine to look at how people's brains react when they're sitting in it. This is looks like a hairdryer from Mars, but it's completely safe and non-invasive and silent. As a person sits in this machine and engages in a task, we can see their brain activity. We can see the areas of content that they're attending to, whether it's a task involving math or problem solving. But what we can also see is the action in their social brains. They are exquisitely sensitive to everything that's going on around them, to the eye gaze of others that they're interacting with, to the nuances of the tones of voice, to the looks on their faces, the smiles, the frowns, and all of their human actions. It's absolutely astounding. Our social brains are always on because we're trying to use them to interpret the meaning of others' actions. But the most profound thing I've learned in the last 10 years has to do with the baby brain. Babies' brains are also very socially active. Again, I know this because I'm the first in the world to put a baby in an MEG machine. Remember, it's totally safe and non-invasive. And when the baby sits in the machine and interacts in a social versus non-social setting, I can see the differences in what's happening in their brains. Again, we see that when a baby is in front of a person who's acting or, say, talking, what happens is the baby brain's not only listening, their sensory systems are active, but the systems that can't yet act yet are rehearsing what it's going to take to get into the conversation. The areas that are responsible for talking back are active as the baby is listening. It's absolutely astounding, and it means that from birth, our social brains are wired to act on the world, not just receive the world, but act on the world. Well, what difference does this make? Again, in other experiments, we've been contrasting learning at all ages, but in this case in babies, in a social versus non-social setting. What we see when we expose babies for the first time to a new language at 9 months. 9 months is a critical time when sounds and words are learned. And we look at what happens when babies are face-to-face with a foreign language speaker for 12 sessions over a month's time, from 9 to 10 months of age. And we look at what that baby learns from 12 sessions of exposure to the foreign language. What we found is that learning is so incredible that the babies in America who had never heard that language before are just as good as the babies in Taiwan or China who have been listening to that language for 10 months at discerning sound differences and picking up on Chinese words. Again, totally astounding. However, when that same material is presented to the baby over a beautiful DVD, everything about the experiment is identical, except now the information is coming from a machine. What happens? The babies stare intently at the machine. You think for all the world they're learning, but they learn nothing, absolutely nothing. No information at all is imparted about language. They don't learn. So again, the social brain is in charge. In fact, we know that for every additional hour per week that a 16-monther under 16 months spends in front of a screen, that child knows 5 less words. The social brain is in charge. The social brain is the gateway to human learning. The social learning doesn't end in infancy. We know, again, from other studies, that children are very, very sensitive and learn best and most robustly and durably when they're in face-to-face action with others. However, we also know, Common Sense Media tells us that our school-age children are spending 6 hours a day on social media. They're in front of screens 6 hours a day. And what this does is take time away from face-to-face interaction with others in play and with others in educational settings. This developmental period is also the time in which children are bringing up their identities, their social identities as learners. They are very sensitive to stereotypes in the culture about what black students are interested in, what girls are interested in. Girls will, by 2nd grade, have absorbed the stereotype that girls aren't interested in math at a time when their math scores is just as good or better than those of their male peers. So a social identity is taking place. These are all social emotional effects. Our teens present an even greater challenge to us. Common Sense Media says that our teens are spending 9 hours a day on social media. Even the teens themselves say this is too much, but they also tell us they don't know how to stop. And this is an age at which identity matters crucially. A teen's identity, whether or not they belong in a classroom, teens will decide not to join a STEM classroom, a class, or join a STEM group because they feel as though they don't belong. They don't see people like them in that classroom. Again, the social brain rules. Our teens are also telling us how much they aspire to making a difference in the world, how much they want to lead. But again, this is a social response. They want to be listened to. They want to be respected. Humans need other humans to learn, and that means all of us, our babies, our school-age children, our high schoolers, and ourselves. It is a signature. The social brain represents a signature of what it means to be human. It's time for parents, for teachers, and for educational policymakers to take the social brain into account, recognize this profound fact coming from science, and act on it. Thank you.
Now please welcome to the stage Mary Helen Imordino Yang.
Good morning. I'm a social affective neuroscientist and a human development psychologist, and I study the way in which children's social experiences and adolescents' social relationships and experiences influence and organize their brain development, and in turn, the way they think about and feel about complex information. And one of the main themes of my work and of the work of the field so far is the deep connection between the experienced relationship, the emotional, subjective perception on the one hand, and the way in which young people make meaning out of complex information on the other. I'm going to demonstrate what I mean, show you a little poem that was written by a kindergartner. Don't try to read it unless you were a kindergarten teacher. It's a little song written by this girl in the pink dress here, and she's singing to her baby brother, Theodore, whom she calls Teddy, and she says, "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual, but sometimes even more, as you make us proud and happy that you're you." I have a simple question for you. Is this a poem about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Or is this a poem about her budding knowledge of planetary science? Right? The way in which we culturally experience our relationships in the world shapes the way in which our brains are organized to take in information, which in turn shapes the way in which we feel about complex issues, including scholarly and disciplinary concepts like planetary science in this case. And I'm going to show you just a tiny bit about what this looks like in the brain. So we put people in the MRI scanner as we expose them to various kinds of stories, some of which we hoped would be deeply inspirational, and some of which are sort of less compelling, less interesting. And we asked people to report to us what they were thinking about and how they were feeling. And the basic theme that emerged from this research is that when people feel subjectively, deeply, emotionally engaged, connected to what they're thinking about, like what they're thinking about is meaningful for their real life, like it teaches them something about how they should think about or understand the world going forward, we see activations in the very same brain systems that literally keep you alive. There's many activations across this brain. Those orange spots represent the places in the brain where we see relatively extra blood flowing, which we know corresponds to relatively more neuron firing underneath those spots. When people are telling us, I am deeply inspired right now, compared to when they're telling us, I'm not that moved or I'm not thinking that deeply about this. And I want to point out to you a couple of the interesting activations. The anterior insulas on the two sides of the head. These are literally visceral somatosensory cortex. These are the parts of the brain that if you poke them, person pukes, right? These are literally the place in which you know how your guts and your internal organs are functioning. When people feel inspired about what they're thinking about, they are literally feeling that knowledge on the substrate of their own visceral self. And all the way down into the brain's stem, the part of the brain that we literally share with alligators, that literally is packed with densely organized little nuclei that monitor your consciousness and your physiology, that intermediate between the brain and the body and the brain, that keep you alive. The spot at the bottom of this image, in the medulla, if you get damage there, we literally cannot keep you alive even on life support. And yet, these are the places that we see massive systematic activations when people tell us they are emotionally engaged in what they're thinking about. This means that no longer can we go forward thinking about schools as places that put knowledge into children's heads. The process of learning is a process of reflecting and internalizing the experiences we have, be those scholarly and academic or social and emotional, and the ways in which those two kinds of learning are organizing the substrate of that visceral self and that conscious person that sits in the middle. Thank you.
Please welcome Commission Co-Chair Linda Darling-Hammond, and welcome back to the stage Patricia Kuhl and Mary Helen Imordino-Yang.
Do we wait for the music? Good morning. I'm Linda Darling-Hammond, co-chair of the commission, and we have launched the day with these two amazing scientists for one reason, and that is to ground our conversation in the science of learning and the science of the brain and how it works. And so compellingly illustrated, thank you both, we now know, due to the advances in the sciences, that you cannot learn without attending to social relationships and emotional development. The science is clear that social, emotional, and cognitive domains of the brain are interrelated and connected in the learning process. And when students are in settings that reinforce the integrated nature of learning, that's when they learn best. So we are going to have a conversation with Pat and Mary Helen and with you. And I'm going to instruct you about the Slido technology that we're going to use to both sort of take questions and crowdsource them. We want you to take out your mobile device. It could be a computer or a phone or whatever, and open your browser. And what you do is type in Slido, slido.com. And do we have this on the screen? Yes, excellent, we have instructions. Enter the event code, which is #ANationAtHope. Click on the upper right-hand corner icon to fill in your information or choose to be anonymous. And then put your questions in. You'll have the opportunity as well to upvote the questions of others if you like them. And about halfway through, we'll have an opportunity to ask some of those questions to our amazing panelists. So the first question I have for both of you is, given what we now know about the brain, what is the number one implication you would identify for the art and science of teaching? Pat, you want to lead us off?
I think one of the most important things is that we all understand these scientific facts. That teachers and educators understand the extent to which the social brain, social emotional brain, is involved in all of our thought and all of our learning. Scientists used to think that the social stuff was on the right side of the brain and isolated, and that logic and mathematics were on the left side of the brain. Brain science has completely debunked that idea. Everything is integrated, the whole person, the whole self. Exactly what we're seeing in these imaging experiments is that it's always awake and alive. You're always bringing things through the social brain. Teachers don't understand this. The public doesn't understand this. It's very important.
Mary Helen, what would you add?
I think I would add that we need to be really clear that the experience and the social orientation of the human brain is not just in the sort of direct social sense of interacting directly with other people, but that knowledge is deeply cultural and situated in the person's own subjective experience. So this means that even the way you think about math or physics, or for that matter, experiments are showing even the way in which you visually parse the world, the way in which you see the physical world, is shaped by the orientation that you've been socially picking up from the relationships that you've been in to that point in your life, which speaks really profoundly to the quality of kids' subjective experiences and personal relationships in organizing their brain to learn in particular ways.
Well, and to that point, children experience a lot of trauma, a lot of adverse conditions in our society. Many kids are living in poverty with food insecurity, homelessness, healthcare insecurity, which creates a kind of toxic stress that can be reinforced in school or ameliorated in school. How do we help educators understand both those effects on how kids are learning and what can be done about that?
Right. I think the power of the social brain can go both ways. It has this incredible affinity, this need to belong, this desire to belong. Identity comes from your social experience with regard to how people like you are treated in the world. So those are all positive, uplifting effects. But the negative is just as strong. So the extent to which bullying stops everything, the extent to which toxic stress in a baby's life really stops the process of synaptic development. All these connections that are wiring in the brain furiously early in development are stopped, are constrained by absolute toxic stress. It really retards that process of brain development. So understanding this is incredibly important to all of us.
And what about the reversing of it? I mean, how do we address that? Mary Helen?
Yeah, I think what I could add is that and this evidence is reviewed in the brief that we wrote, is that the reason stress is toxic is because the person is experiencing it as such, right? It's the way in which the person is emotionally feeling that's changing the hormonal composition of their blood, which is literally signaling the brain to change in particular ways that are well documented now. So persistent adversity in a child's life leads the child's brain to kind of build circuits for aggression and for anxiety and fear at the expense of those for learning and memory. And what we need to understand is that when we see these aggressive profiles, they're not sort of punishable offenses. They're the child's brain showing us what it's adapted how to do because it's needed to in that child's world. And we need them to literally relive their life in a more positive and a socially acceptable way in order for them to start to rework those circuits and enable learning more effectively.
So those relationships that create a sense of security become the inoculation or the response
That's right.
To that experience. So what is it that you would identify that we should stop doing in education?
We should stop treating children as though they're in front of us and we're going to just dump information into them. It's not this sort of unidirectional style of learning that we were brought up on. The typical classroom with all desks facing forward and teacher at the front. It's just the opposite of what brains are seeking, which is this totally active and interactive style of learning. We need to get architects to design different kinds of classrooms, to take advantage of the social brain, to capitalize on this power that we have to make learning more active and alive.
Yeah, that reminds me of all the classrooms. I remember these in New York City where the desks were literally bolted to the floor, facing forward. What about your idea for what we should stop?
I think we should stop treating children's brains like they're separate from the rest of their body and their relationships, right? That's sort of an obvious thing. But children are not little brains in a box. They're actually children with bodies and lives and cultural orientations and values and beliefs and relationships and desires and wants and dislikes and anxieties. And all those things exist in all children to varying degrees. And we need to treat children as such. The educational experience is one that's meant to help them make meaning out of those experiences in more and more complex and nuanced and skilled and targeted ways. rather than one that's meant to supplant or replace their other experiences with something new that we call scholarly academic learning.
Yeah. And just the mention of children's bodies, we have a lot of evidence that physical activity is actually supportive of the wiring of the brain. And so,
And not just in children, by the way.
We think better when we're moving and walking and being physically fit. And so, in Finland, they go out every hour for 15 minutes. The kids go outside, even in the snow, put on their little snowsuits, and that may be why they score so well on PISA. Isn't the social stuff, a lot of people think the social stuff is sort of the fluff of education, the sort of mushy side of things. Are we in danger of that kind of compromising rigor and educational excellence?
I don't think so. I think that, again, the brain science is telling us how misguided that idea was, that really we have a side of our brain that's for the soft stuff, for our emotions, for music, and for our sort of sensations, and the other side is more for logic and this very careful thinking and mathematics. And what we see in brain science studies is that the whole brain is active all of the time. And particularly these social areas distributed widely, not just in one place in the brain, but very precise mapping of the actions and the nuances that we're unaware that we're picking up. And the fact that babies seem to be wired this way from the beginning. An 8-monther tracks your eye gaze and learns the names of things by looking at what you're looking at as you name something. So that means that these babies are wired that way from the beginning. The whole brain is always active. The whole brain is processing information socially because that's where the meaning is. That's the meaning of the information that is being conveyed to them.
So it's really a process of lassoing that instinct toward academic excellence. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, which leads really nicely into what I was going to add, which is that I see the field of social, emotional, and academic development as having kind of two big conversations, which are deeply intertwined with each other, but that both need recognition and explicit focus and support in the schooling. One is so-called social emotional skills, right? The ability to relate well with other people, to manage yourself well, to manage your own emotions, these kinds of executive functioning and other skills. And the other is to recognize that the process of building knowledge is an inherently emotionally connected, deeply subjective experience. If you talk to any disciplinarian, a neuroscientist about why they do what they do, or a physicist about why they do what they do, they love what they do. They feel connected to that content. And I think we need to design educational experiences that facilitate kids truly building emotional engagement and commitment to the ideas that they're learning about, and to truly appreciate the power of those skills and ideas for understanding and changing the world.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
Yes.
There obviously, yes.
That's beautiful.
There are obviously a lot of implications for how we think about learning environments if we really take this seriously. And we've learned by looking at the design of schools that building structures that allow for relationships, that allow teachers to care effectively, advisory systems in high school that create that opportunity for kids to have someone who's an advocate, looping where teachers get to stay with the same kids for more than 1 year, teaching teams that can share information about kids and problem solve. All of those things make a difference in how teachers can be effective in the ways in which they build those relationships. How do we think about the challenges of redesigning our learning environments?
I think they're large. I think we have to think differently outside the box with regard to how children can be allowed to capitalize on their social, emotional skills when trying to learn content. I also think that we need a new curriculum, both for teachers and for students, to teach us all about our own brains. One of the things we've discovered in new studies that we're now doing with teens 9 to 19 is the extent to which they're hungry for information about their own brains. They're surprised to learn about the areas of the brain and what they specialize in. They're surprised to understand how connectivity between those areas develops, and surprised to understand how their emotions are represented in the brain and how important their social reactions and emotions are in the brain. We ought to be teaching ourselves and even our middle school students and particularly high school students about their own brains, because not only will we inspire the next generation of brain scientists, we will inspire them to look deeply within themselves to understand what's going on up there and to use that information about themselves to guide their lives.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that children are so moved by learning about their own brain is because they're deeply, passionately interested in understanding who they are and what they're capable of being, right? And so we can start with the neuroscience. We can also look at all the civics and societal applications and the ways in which young people can be much more fully engaged in actually building the society they want to be part of at every age in age-appropriate ways that are socially connected, that are truly valuable, that are truly putting into the world and the community in which they live. Children recognize when this is really happening, and it is deeply, deeply inspirational and motivational to them. And when we connect our young people and our teachers to a place where they can really own what they're doing for real, that moves us forward in amazing ways.
Well, we now have, I've been trying to get the Slido questions up here, so we now have a variety of questions, and some are coming up on the screen here. They're not the same as what I have on my screen. You know, in the olden days, you had children to help you tend the farm. Now you have children to help tend your technology. But my kids aren't here, so I'm going to have to try to figure this out myself. Well, let's start with Lindsay Jeffrey's question. I understand caring adults can counteract toxic stress. What role could mentoring programs play in supporting the social brain development? Pat, do you want to respond to that one?
What we've learned by looking at children across a variety of environments is that it doesn't have to be a parent. It needs to be a caring adult. Every child needs a mentor. Every child needs someone who is totally accepting, that will allow the child to express what's happening to them, how they feel, and how they're interacting with the world. And I think the more that we understand as adults, I think Tim said, it takes a village. Yes, it takes a village, because if all of us understand the role that we can play in mentoring and helping guide the pathways that children can take, that only they can define, the more that we can explain to them that it's their choice and their ability to understand where their passions lie, the more that we can all help our children grow.
And having that one-on-one relationship where you can bring anything and talk about anything and problem solve with someone is just powerful in its own right. Did you want to add anything on that? That's good. Okay. The second question is, how do we integrate these learnings into the classroom without making teachers feel like this is one more burden or a separate initiative to learn? And I'd love to say one thing about that, because I've been educating teachers for a long time. And this is part of what we integrate into the teacher education program at Stanford and many other places. And part of it is really helping people develop, to your point, not a one-way pedagogy, which is open up the brain and put stuff in, but a two-way pedagogy in which part of the teacher's repertoire is learning about the students, who they are, opening up that pathway of communication, spending that first week of school, having kids share, what they experience, care about, want to get out of their own learning, how they learn, having that opportunity on a regular basis to get feedback from kids, as well as giving information to them and learning to listen. And if that's part of your regular routine, if it's the way you teach, it's not an add-on. It's a strategy that is always in place. And I am always stunned by the social psychological studies where people try to help ameliorate stereotype threat, the fact that kids can come in worried that their social identity in some way will cause people to think less of them, to have a sort of a stigma attached. And one of those studies, they just did a little activity at the beginning of school where kids were asked to write down their goals and aspirations for the class and their what they wanted to accomplish and how they learned and what they wanted the teacher to know. And the teacher just answered each of those notes. And that group of kids did better academically, and it's been replicated many times than other kids without just that illustration of caring and the teachers knowing enough about the kids to respond differently to them. So it can become part of a routine. You want to add to that, Mary Ellen?
I mean, I think this, the title of the National Commission sums this up really nicely and is a major sea change, actually. Thinking about schools as places that promote development. We think of them as being related to learning, and of course they are institutions that promote learning at their best, right? But actually learning is both organized and enabling development, and it's really about the way in which our schools and our institutions are set up to focus on the person in the middle, both the teachers and the students becoming a fuller human being in whatever that means to them in that context. And the learning follows that. And so I really think what this is speaking to is a way of shifting the way in which we think about the goal of school, so that rather than focusing only on the learning outcomes, or exclusively on the learning outcomes, we focus on the processes that get people to think and feel in the ways that we care about, that we know are supportive of good habits of mind and of high-level knowledge building, and then the learning comes on top of that.
So how do we infuse these ideas into out-of-school time and into sports and other places where kids, engage?
It's very interesting to see where learning takes place. We're learning all the time. Learning is implicit at every action you have in the world. Your brain is changing as a function of experience. And this division between informal learning and formal learning in school, if you look at the amount of time that we spend throughout our lives, most of it is in informal learning. There's just this narrow piece in which we're actually in schools learning. So this infusion of ideas and the transfer of information between informal learning centers, kind of settings, and formal learning is really important, that we try to keeping parents in the loop about what's happening in school, keeping portfolios where kids are taking into account not only what they're doing in their formal education settings, but what they're doing outside of school, where they're learning things, in sports, in music, in activities of all kinds. Kids are learning things. They're developing a personality. They're developing a set of passions and a pathway for themselves. Keeping track of that so that parents and teachers and the children themselves are guiding that activity. This is me. This is my portfolio. I think that's an interesting idea, one that we should promote.
It also suggests that all of the adults who work with kids, whether they're coaching in after-school teams or whether they're involved in a youth development program or so, need to be sharing sort of a common developmental framework and a way of understanding the child in common.
Whole child.
I think about the way that Jim Comer's school development program educates everyone in the environment, parents, all of the school people, all of the out-of-school adults, to a common understanding. And I think that's a really big piece of this.
Even police force and other kinds of community members who children are interacting with during their day outside of school. It's really important that we bring them all together into the conversation so that children are receiving consistent messaging around what it means to be a citizen of that community.
And so many schools are now really connecting beyond the school world. So formal learning has been distinguished sometimes in the past by being abstract, decontextualized learning.
Right.
But expeditionary learning, the MET, a lot of other school designs are really reaching kids into the community. Internships, externships, community service, civic engagement. All of those are powerful forms of learning that make book learning much more relevant and able to be integrated into thinking and learning. So how do we infuse this into, wait, we just changed the order here. We had one about student teachers, but it has disappeared. So how do we help, teachers in training really learn about the brain?
I would love to start a curriculum that would be in
I'd love to do that with you. That'd be so much fun.
All education colleges across the nation and the world, actually,
Yeah.
to say, this is your brain on learning. This is what's actually happening up there. This is how you're processing information. I really think that not only the teachers, but the kids themselves would love understanding how their brains are growing and what they can do about it, how they can grow that brain in particular ways that
And
would
we have some
support the
evidence that that
passions.
really makes a
Yes,
difference
it
for
makes
kids.
a huge difference.
Yeah.
But we lack those curricula. We need to develop them.
Yeah. And you know, I think the other piece of that is sort of not only how the brain works, but then what are some specific things as a
Yeah.
teacher that you can do
That
to
you can
really
do.
foster that kind of integrated development.
Mm-hmm.
What are the implications for personalized learning based on the social brain science?
Well, should I start?
Yeah, please.
go ahead.
I think personalized learning is really a movement that, at its best, focuses on the fact that people are individuals and everyone's different. And even if we were all the same, we would still need to build the meaning for ourselves. And so high-quality learning environments are inherently personalized because they're setting up the learner, the teacher also being a learner in that case, to have agency in the way in which they go about doing things, and then to learn skills and have opportunities for demonstrating that knowledge and for revisiting and reflecting on that knowledge over time so that we inherently become learners who are iteratively engaging in this socially constructed process of thinking well about the world and applying our skills inside and outside of school and in various ways. So personalized learning is really the backbone of the entire enterprise, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need 35 lesson plans for 35 kids. It means you mean one really well-designed environment where everyone can engage and start from their own place.
Yeah, and then being alert to what kids
may
you
need.
know,
Some kids may need some
Exactly.
extra,
Yeah.
right? Or a certain different kind of style may work well.
Yeah, and allowing those tests to be enterable from different perspectives and pathways.
Right.
So how do we responsibly leverage technology to support learning? You know, actually this question about personalized learning is an interesting one. It used to mean, personalized learning used to mean relationships and, you know, figuring out how to have a strong relationship. And it's increasingly come to mean putting kids in front of a computer with their own computer program. Now there are lots of places that are putting those ideas together. But how do we think about the use of technology to responsibly support and, in some cases, personalize learning?
Right. I mean, technology is not going away, not for any of us. And so the idea is to utilize it, but to be careful. So when you hear teens tell you that they recognize that they're on technology too much, they're using it too much, and that they can't stop. Literally, they tell you they can't stop.
And there is evidence that it is addictive.
That it can be addictive for all of
absolutely.
us. And so I think we need to leverage technology. One of the findings from both studies of children and studies of teens is that when you combine social interactivity around technology, so create technology that's shareable and where you're face-to-face and you're pointing out various things, you're picking up on various things, you're combining both social interaction and technology can be very, very effective. Even in very young children, doing things together around technologies. There's something about the social presence of another human being. That's basically another talk. But our studies are showing that whenever we learn in the presence, the mere presence of another human being enhances learning, even in babies. But in children and in teens, there's something electrifying to the brain about being with others, and that learning is something that we evolved to do together to survive. So we need to capitalize on that. We need to be very inventive and creative around technology.
And the studies around technology effectiveness often show that it's the combination of groups of people, you know, working together around problems using technology that is the most effective.
Right.
I want to get, that last question that disappeared, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Mary Helen, you can get first stab. How do we use this social emotional learning and academic development around an social justice initiative, social justice curriculum, and really enable people to claim their own education and experience.
Yeah, this is the million-dollar question, right? And it's extremely difficult, but I think at its heart, the nature of the enterprise is to be thinking about honoring the experience of the individual as something that's real. as something that is worth actually considering in trying to understand how it is that a child or an adult comes to view the world the way in which they do. And by truly honoring and listening to and hearing, right, which are different things, the experiences of others, we all enrich our own ability to make sense out of what's happening, and we build a world together that is inclusive, that's truly inclusive, not whitewashed inclusive, but actually enables a voice from every person. And so we really need to be very strategic and very reflective about the ways in which our policies and our ideas can be dominated by or shaped inadvertently by the cultural orientations that we, whoever the big we is, bring to the table. And we need to actually explicitly focus on, in a sort of anthropological way, I think, thinking about what is experienced by those subjectively who are living the world we're creating, and honoring and understanding that in a way that truly helps us all to appreciate and learn from one another in a much broader way than our society has currently enabled.
Right. Great place to stop. Thank you very much. Thank you, Linda. Stand up. Yeah. That was great.
And now, for our first student spotlight, please welcome to the stage Christina Gashi and Michael Kaczynski.
Good morning. My name is Pristina Gashi, and I'm a 7th grade student at the Inter-District School for Arts and Communication, or ISAC, in New London, Connecticut.
And good morning. My name is Mike Kaczynski. I'm the 6th grade history teacher at ISAC.
We will share with you a project that shows how social, emotional, and academic learning can be so tightly woven that you cannot separate building scholarship from building character.
And we'll also be hearing from you, Pristina, about how this project changed you as a student and as a person. So, Pristina, tell us about the work.
Sure. Last year, we interviewed 16 local immigrants about their stories of becoming Americans. Our essential question was, can describing the human experience of immigration change stereotypes we see in our community? We created gallery-quality photographs of them that became an exhibit that toured the state. We've created a professional-quality interactive book that shares the unique stories of immigration. All of the money from selling this book helps pay their legal expenses. We have already helped some of our partners get their green cards.
How did that make you feel?
Very proud.
So what about your academic learning?
This really pushed us. We had experts come in. I worked with a Yale professor who teaches interview skills to doctors. I was learning interview skills that were taught to medical students. And I studied photography with an actual photographer. The academic pressure was high because this really was important work. I was telling the story of Lisbeth, who came here from Peru. And my grandma does know her. I had to do it beautifully to honor her. Now, Mr. K, I'm gonna be honest with you for a moment.
Please.
Before working on this project, I wasn't the best at school. But now I see the value of doing well in school because your work can really matter. Now I have a question for you, Mr. K.
Yes.
How could you trust us as kids to do such important, impactful work?
I knew that I had to trust you if you were going to trust me. I remember the first time that your project was recognized. You became the youngest ever recipients of the Angela Anderson Award at the Connecticut Immigration Day at the state capitol for being people who positively impacted the lives of immigrants across this state. Do you?
Thank you.
Your classmate Edgar was in shock. He felt like a celebrity in front of all of the lights and the cameras and the politicians. And then he said to me after the event, Mr. K, it's getting into people's hearts, and I'm a part of that. And I couldn't have been more proud.
Thank you.
So, Pristina, how has this project changed you as a person?
Well, my family are immigrants. My dad is Albanian and Muslim, and my mom is Mexican and Catholic. So those are two totally different religions and cultures in one little girl. It taught me in so many ways. I learned how to be courageous, and I learned that my courage helped others be courageous. I spoke at 13 different gallery events, and yesterday was my first time on an airplane, so that took a little bit of courage too. I went from arguing to my dad about a cell phone to talking about quotes from the project that inspired me to bettering our connection this year. Now, Mr. K, how did this project change you as a person?
You know, Pristina, my family are immigrants too. My grandfather, Hank, immigrated from Norway, and when he was just your age, he was captured by the Nazis and thrown in jail. And I remember connecting with his story on so many levels, even though we were so different. You made that same connection with Lisbeth, didn't you?
Definitely.
And what's more is that you wanted to share her story, even in front of crowds as large as 1,300 people.
That is a lot of people.
It is. So you educated me even on my stereotypes and what I thought my students could accomplish. So Pristina, keep educating us, please. What would you like to leave us with here today?
After one of our events, one of our immigrants wrote us a thank you note, which said, "Words cannot describe how proud I feel to have my story shared with so many people. For the first time since I got here, 10 years ago, I feel like I have a voice." Our country is a nation of immigrants. We need to learn that we are humans who immigrated. My friend Jeanne-Lee said that she heard one of our state senators say that our class is the future. We are not the future. We are the present. And we are not going anywhere.
Thank you, Pristina.
Thank you, Mr. K. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Michael Gerson and Representative Robert Baining, Governor Jack Markell, Senator Joyce Elliott, and Governor Mitch Daniels.
That's hard to follow. Really inspiring. I feel a little like my teenage son. There are 4 screens here that I'm supposed to be looking at. But I'm really honored to be with you. I was at the dinner last night, and there is so much idealism and energy in this room. And I'm really honored to be with what I regard as models of public service. People that really know these issues and have acted with idealism in a time of cynicism. This movement carries an essential insight, that children learn best when they are treated as human beings with social, emotional, and academic needs, that students can't be challenged until they feel safe and valued. I think that's a very valuable contribution. And there are a few reasons that it has momentum, why this movement has momentum. First, it really is a bottom-up movement. I've seen that in this group. Second, the values of this movement are truly bipartisan. It emphasizes both character and creative teaching. It's the type of thing that can unite a divided country. I think it has both an intuitive appeal and now the increasing insights of really good science. And that, I think, gives it momentum. And I hope, this is more of a hope, that Americans are growing tired of cable TV discourse. They've been looking into the abyss of polarization. And at least some of them are ready for something better. And you guys are ready to provide it. Before we start our discussion, I want to mention, please be preparing questions to use with Slido, because we will get to them before the end. Let me start with Governor Daniels. Last night at dinner, we were talking about the language of soft skills, okay, and what might be some of the insufficiency of that language. How should we talk about this set of skills?
The point I think I was trying to make was not to suggest we abandon the language of soft skills. They're very, very important. We hear it all the time at our level from employers as they look at our graduates, that these things are just as important as a grasp of science, math, substantive learning. The point I was trying to make was that the term can be a little misleading because there are also some hard skills, for lack of a better term, that are very important. Resilience and the ability to face inevitable adversity, whether it's in the grade school classroom or adult life, with some sense of confidence and an attitude to bounce back. And in this great report, for which I think we all should be very grateful, one of the cautions that I had reading it was that not to let language about warm and supportive relationships, as important as all that is, mislead people, because some might be, to think this is just the latest extension of the self-esteem movement, which has not served education well, in my opinion, when overdone. And so that was, I think, all I was trying to say last night, Michael, was that there's a mix here, and maybe there's a better adjective to cover the whole complex of these capabilities and characteristics than soft.
There is a challenge there, I think, a broader challenge. How do we make clear, and whoever wants to answer, that this approach is not an alternative to rigor, not an alternative to high standards? How do you make that case?
Well, I would suggest you make that case by talking about what is essential to a whole child. And the notion that when we know better, we do better. Some of us have known better for a very long time, but I think we have the science behind us now. We understand that we have folks, especially folks who are employers, that are clamoring for these skills that we're talking about, but more than anything, they're important to life in a community. They are important for a child to grow up and be a whole human being, I think. So for me, as a legislator and somebody who's a former teacher and somebody who is a parent, these skills are essential. We have to make the case, though, I think, and show people how they are and where they apply. It just can't be in the abstract. I think that's what's really important for us to do.
Well, I'm glad you raised the either-or question, and it's something that Tim Shriver mentioned also. It's not either or, it's and both. And any teacher in this room knows this. I mean, how can we possibly expect our kids to learn if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel supported? There's a sociologist, Claude Steele, who has done some really important work on this issue in terms of making sure that students feel connected to their classrooms, to their schools, to their communities, respected. And we just see it. I mean, we just see so many students who come into school every day with trauma, I mean, like serious trauma. And it's a legitimate question, how do we really expect them to learn the math and the English and all the high standards, which are really, really important, critically important. We can't just have well-adjusted kids if they don't actually know real things, but it's hard to get them to understand the real things if they don't feel a sense of place and a sense of connection to the community. And I think this is really a great opportunity to connect the research, the academic research, with what folks who have been in the classroom for years know literally from their first day in the classroom.
If I can just share, I also would agree that we're at a perfect place in time because we have employers, as Joyce and Governor Daniels have talked about, who are demanding these kind of soft skills, showing up on time, communication, collaboration, all of those things that are so important. And also, I think it also plays into school safety. That's a huge issue in our country today. And I think they both kind of play together and have an impetus, I think, from both employers as well as from the education community. How can we come together and bring these together and really make a difference?
Senator Elliott, I want to raise something with you. A lot of people are victims of a national standards debate, okay? There's a lot of bitterness in the water when it comes to these issues in education. How is this different than what we've been through?
Well, I think in your opening comments, you talked about how this is from the bottom up, but people felt the same way about some other initiatives that we've had. The people who were involved were adamant. This is from the bottom up, and this truly is. But what I want to suggest to us, though, that's not going to be enough for us just to say it. For example, I know as a teacher, I taught school for 30 years, and every time the next bright, shiny object came along, somebody generally who was not in education at all would tell all of us what we needed to do. So we would switch and do that because other people had the power. I think the way this can be different and should be different is, number one, recognize there is the distinct possibility it's going to be perceived as one more thing for teachers to do, and be realistic about that. But I think the way to get around that is to make sure, and I would beseech you to talk to especially those people like me who are in legislative seats and can have the power to impose rather than collaborate. We have to make this something that's educator-driven when it's implemented. For example, that would look like, I go back to my state in Arkansas and I said, there's this wonderful thing happening, here's this great report, and this cannot be another add-on for you, but as legislators and folks who have that power, we need to figure out some things that we're doing that are not working now to make space for teachers to get the training they need, but more than anything, make space for educators to be the one who will help tell us how it should be implemented with our support. Because if we don't do that, it will be just like any other standards that we've had out there. There is a huge thing that's happening in our country now. It's getting worse and worse, that we're devaluing what the experts can bring to the table because we haven't allowed them to do so. For this to work, and it must, we must say to teachers, here's something we think is great and valuable to do, show them why and how. How do you want to work with us to help us get it implemented? Because it should be embedded in what we do every day. And if it's not embedded, it will be perceived as an add-on. If we don't remove something else, it probably will be as well.
Governor, did you have a thought there? No.
Well, I'm hopeful this will not be perceived as another top-down. And I was there. Former Governor of Georgia, Sonny Perdue, and I were the original co-chairs of the Common Core standards, and we have some scars on our back as a result of that. But I really do see this as very different. I spent a lot of time in Delaware with Teachers of the Year for all the districts. We go into their classrooms, and these kinds of principles are exactly the ones that high-quality teachers have already been incorporating, have been embedding into their work. And I think what really often struck me about those visits is just, maybe love is too strong a word, but I don't know that it is. I mean, I think you can really feel the connection between these teachers and their students, because the teachers realized the students would only be able to learn if they felt respected, appreciated, and safe in their classrooms.
Representative Benning, I want to ask, where is the education debate right now in your state?
Well, there's a number of things going on. Frankly, school safety is one that continues to be a debate. Teacher salaries, we want to elevate the profession of education, try to do more. I think in our country, unfortunately, educators have been beaten down. And I agree with Senator Elliott. I think it's very important that this is a bottom-up and not top-down. I know that we have a bill, for instance, that's going to look at sunsetting a lot of the regulations. We have requirements for bullying, for suicide prevention, you can just go down the whole list, and we expect teachers to fix all of the ills of society. And how do we do more to empower educators and let them teach? I think that's the frustration that a lot of us have, is let teachers teach and let them do what they do best. And so I think it's really important that we focus on this being a bottom-up, not top-down, and continue to look at that as a priority in terms of moving forward. And then school safety is another thing. We're looking at more flexibility instead of hardening buildings? How do we use more of the resources that we are making available for school safety for social emotional and try to establish and really do more in schools to help educators and counselors, psychologists provide more services for kids?
I want to hear all of your perspective on the challenge of keeping this vision bipartisan. But maybe we'll start with you, Governor Daniels. If you have any thoughts, how do you keep this set of issues on a bipartisan basis?
I think there are points of emphasis that will appeal to people who might otherwise stand apart from it. Bob just mentioned an important one in school safety. You know, just like society at large, until there is order, nothing else can really, nothing else matters. Mm-hmm. And emphasizing that the goal, even of the warm, supportive environment that the report keeps describing, is order in the classroom and is safety. I mean, I don't know a better way to tell a child, I value you then, that I won't let that guy over there hurt you or ruin your day. And yet we've not done this. I for one, think the pulling back of these, I thought, terribly misguided rules about removing students from the classroom was a really important step. And I think the report can be read to emphasize points like that. And your point, Michael, that there is not a tension, and there's certainly no tilt here in favor of child's self-regard, self-esteem, and rigor. I think I can find those intimations in this report, but I think they'll need to be drawn out if you really want balanced support and not some folks to suspect this is just the latest play to make it easier on the whole system, to excuse the poor results, and to demand more resources.
Have anyone else that wants to address that point about making this bipartisan? How do you do it in your state?
Well, I have practiced at this every day because I live in a state where I'm a Democrat and we're in a super minority. Right. So if I'm going to get something done, I have to figure out a way for things to be bipartisan. And that's not all bad, by the way. And so where I usually start, and where I think most people can start, if we will decide, number one, that we think this is important, I think that's the first place. If it's important to us, is it important for all kids? Is it important for the safety of our kids? Is it important for their development and so forth? Is it important for them to be a whole person? It's not just learn math and nothing else. So if we can agree that this is important, and I believe that's a real doable thing, then the only other small, big step is, then how do we do it? Because once everybody wants it, and they are passionate about it, we will figure out a way to do it. And the way we get there is I mean, my friends always laugh at me for saying, I think compromise is a lazy way to do policy, unless, of course, you've exhausted collaboration. So collaboration has to be the way we get there, where we're respecting each other, understanding not everybody is going to agree with me. What I call character, somebody else might call something else. But that takes some time, some understanding, but probably as much as anything, it requires people who are in office to demonstrate exactly what's in that report. And if we can't do that, we don't even have a right to ask somebody else to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how we ought to hold ourselves accountable.
You know, if this were an issue being debated in Congress, I'd worry about being partisan. But I think probably most of you are not from Washington, D.C. This is not going to be a partisan issue. I mean, this is something that when it comes, and frankly, most of the issues in the states are not partisan. People don't care if a good idea is a Democratic idea or a Republican idea. All they care about is whether their schools are getting better, whether their communities are getting safer, whether the jobs are more plentiful and paying more. Those are not Democratic or Republican ideas. And I do think that this is something, there is a lot of pent-up demand from communities across the country for this kind of focus. We need to make sure that it's not at the exclusion of high standards, high quality assessments, and all of those things, but this is absolutely a facilitator. And I cannot, so long as the debate stays out of Washington, I'm really not too worried about this becoming a partisan issue in states across the country.
Is Indiana a good example, or?
I would say so, and I agree with staying out of Washington. I think a Common Core, and if we had stayed out of Washington, we might have had a totally different results on Common Core. Yeah, I think the other thing reason you can make a great way to try to make this bipartisan is by engaging the business community. I mean, I think the business community is definitely demanding these more soft skills, grit, whatever you want, character. Indiana is #1 per capita in manufacturing in the country, and I can't tell you how many of employers are constantly telling me, I just can't find employees that can come to work, show up on time, that can work together, collaborate. Just give us that. And so I think you have, business engaged, and I think you also have, people who understand in education. So I think you have an opportunity really to bring everybody together as long as you collaborate and don't try to force this on. And I also would agree with Governor Daniels that we need to be careful not to make this a discussion of self-esteem, because I think, too often we talk about elevating our kids, and I've frequently heard anecdotally talks about how the United States our kids have ranked #1 in self-esteem, but National Conference State Legislature and our State of International Education found that our kids were like dead last in terms of problem solving, critical thinking. So how do we work together to make sure that this isn't just a soft and fuzzy thing, but something that really develops the whole person in the end?
See, if you don't mind, Mike.
Sure,
This
please.
is a good example of what I'm talking about. Bob and I work together a great deal. He's a staunch Republican, I'm a staunch Democrat, but we're actually very good friends and we do stuff together. I have the total, well, I shouldn't say total opposite, that may be too superlative. I have kind of an opposite view about self-esteem. I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with the way we have grown our self-esteem, because I think we were thinking the same thing, but we were using different wordings. And this is what I mean about our getting to a point we can collaborate. Even though I have no problem with the use of the word self-esteem, I'm totally willing to give that up and say whatever and couch this how we need to say it so that we can appeal to the most people. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It sounds like a small thing, but is it really going to bother me to have to use another word when we are going to the same place is what we're talking about. And sometimes we get so stuck on something, we just won't move. And now, please know, I require the same thing of Bob as well. He's done that too. So we have really tried to model what we've talked about in other ways we have worked together.
Okay. Let me move from vision to practice just briefly before we get to questions, which people should be thinking about. Is it true that the Every Student Succeed Act of 2015, with its emphasis on devolution, has provided opportunities for this type of reform? Do you see that as an opportunity?
I see it as an opportunity. It's not clear to me that many of the states are actually taking full advantage of the opportunity, and that has been a problem. I think this is and that could be a much broader conversation, but I think a lot of states have chosen the relatively easy way out. I think this, as it relates to this issue, this is a very good opportunity. A number of states have incorporated into their ESSA plans the idea of school climate surveys, which is probably a good thing. And I think in general, it's been somewhat disappointing, but I think this particular issue gives states this particular issue does give states an opportunity to focus in on it in a big way.
Mitch, I'm interested, by the way, in your view, because conservatives talk a lot about devolution. But devolution alone isn't the answer here, right? I mean, when does devolution work for children?
It works anywhere that you have good leadership, and I think this report's, everybody keeps talking about bottom up. I think devolution is another word for that, or an enabler of that. So. I've always felt that the federal role ought to be very cautious. With those at the federal level ought to be very cautious. Standards, yes. Prescription, careful. And we've had a lot of prescription without much to show for it, I think, over too many recent years. And I think both sides have had a go at that. So Our federal system has so much to recommend. We see it in multiple contexts: economic development, fiscal policy, and certainly education. And one of its premier, it's a safeguard of freedom, but another cardinal virtue that it has is its self-correcting mechanism. And so when Jack was doing something really smart in Delaware, the rest of us noticed.
Yeah.
It happened a couple times, I remember. No, it happened all the time. And conversely, you can learn from others' mistakes. So I don't see a better way forward, and I'm not an expert on the 2015 law, but if that's the general essence of it, then I think that it was probably well advised.
Did you feel like addressing it?
I would say that first off, ESSA was coined the greatest evolution, but if you really read it, in fact, I was talking to a colleague the other day who said, let's just do away with state standardized assessment. I'm like, well, that's not what ESSA said, so unfortunately that's not something that we have the option to do. I do think that it does push us to look at other alternatives, and I would agree with Governor Markle that unfortunately, if you look at a lot of ESSA plans, they're not very creative, and they're just basically replicating some of the same old practices that we've always done. So I think we have an opportunity, but states have not taken advantage of it, maybe for fear of the fact that there'll be a pendulum swing back that would have more regulation. But I think the USDOE has made very clear that they're not going to get involved in regulating in a bigger way. But I just don't think we've taken advantage of some of the opportunities that have been afforded.
Now we're going to turn to our computer overlord, Slido. And be sure you submit your questions and upvote questions you like. The first one here, it's anonymous. How do you address criticism that it is not the place of schools, and instead character, etc., should be taught at home?
I thought maybe the most arresting phrase in a very well-written report was the term missing ingredient. And there in 2 words is so much of the problem we're dealing with here. One reason we should all be so grateful for this report and all the work that went into it is that it is addressing the central question, I think, of education, which is we are asking this system to do things it never had to do before. Family used to provide this missing ingredient. Church used to, or religious training used to provide much of this missing ingredient. And the support in more supportive neighborhoods, the loss of the intact family. I've said so many times over the years, if I find that lamp on the beach, you can keep the second and third wishes. Just give me one, and I would wish that every child in this country would grow up in an intact, loving household, at least intact. And so many of our other worries and pathologies would decline dramatically. We all know this. All right, that's not going to happen. And Jeannie's out of that lamp. So I really believe that while the question is theoretically exactly the right question, it was answered a long time ago by the erosion of these character building, confidence reinforcing environments that most kids, whatever else, may have been materially destitute, but they had that. They don't have that anymore, and they're not going to, apparently. I'm sorry to say, deprofessionalization of teaching and the wonderful opportunities available now to more women to go pursue other things have played a role too. But that's why I think that this report is timely and necessary, and the gap is not going to be filled as it once was by environments that these children lived in before they come to school and when they go home from school.
I think that I'm sorry, Bob. You
No,
want to
go ahead.
Okay.
Right.
I am really conflicted about this because, just as the governor said, the cake is already baked about what's happened to our families. We need to be working on making that better. But to me, this is the reason that one of the reasons this report is so important is what it says about the whole community being a part of it, not just the schools. But if we're going to concentrate just on the schools, we need to remember that I think as a legislator all the time, the things that we have done that have led to the very problem that we're complaining about is the way families have been separated, and I think more than any other way by the criminal justice system. So, for example, one of the reasons there are so many black men with their families is because you know where they are. They're in prison. And they're there for reasons many times, not because everybody's saying they're innocent, but we had policies that were absolutely, we look at them now and say we're changing a lot of those things. They were just policies that were ill-informed, and that's why I'm always saying when we know better, we will do better. Since we have done that and we can't fix that right away, we should be moving toward those kind of solutions where we're trying to help families get back together, not just those who are incarcerated. But right now, I think the best response is for this to be in the schools first and foremost. And in the communities, we talk about building adult capacity. We can begin that process. But the kids at school every day, and we have an opportunity. So I think it would be ill-advised of me if I did not recognize that that was the case. Like, for example, I had a young man. I always try to make my kids feel really, really welcome to my class. I welcome them at the door every day, and I hug them. I was teaching 11th and 12th grade. Women can get away with that more so than men. But it was important to the kids in that class. And one day when one kid came in and I failed to hug him or something, and he came back and said, I want a hug, and he said, oh my God, you smell just like yellow cake. And I thought, what did that mean? I smell like yellow cake. Well, I had a conversation because I said, that's such a new and important thing to say. But to him, to him that meant his mother, because his mother made yellow cakes all the time, and they smelled like vanilla. And remember that time when we used to wear vanilla? That's what I was wearing. But to wrap this up, though, I think where I'm going with this is the public schools, and that's all I can speak about. The public schools are to be those places where our kids learn about all different kind of people, different kind of thoughts and whatnot. It is the place, though, where this character building, this is a place where they are supposed to be experimenting a small democracy. So that's why it makes so much sense to me that working on character in our schools will be important, but it's also important about how we teach it and what the community knows about what we're teaching as we move this out into the community. Because these are our little experiments of democracy. That is the reason I think it's so terribly important that our schools are integrated in so many ways so that they can see what a democracy ought to look like. If we separate them and have them in schools where everybody looks alike and we're surprised democracy is having an issue, that's more the reason we need what we're talking about right now.
If you look at the history of American education, from the very beginning, our schools have been teaching character. I mean, if you think back to, when I was in school, even public schools would talk about the 10 Commandments and training and love and things like that. I think that I reflect and think that we've had the breakdown of the family. The other issue that I think has become a critical problem is social media. And what happens in social media today is the isolationism of our whole society. We don't talk to each other. We don't communicate to each other. We don't know who our neighbors are. And I think that, kids historically have always been mean to each other, but it's so much easier today to click a button. Somebody's bullying me, and Governor Markle clicks like, and what does that make me feel like? So I think it's a perfect place for schools to be reinforcing character as they have in our history of America. And I think it's a very important place. I think that you got to differentiate between character and values. And as Joyce said, it has to be character, things that the community basically supports and says we all believe these are important characteristics that we need to move forward with in our society today.
One of the things that strikes me is how much finger pointing amongst adults there is when it comes to talking about kids. And even the way this question is framed, how do you address criticism that this is not the place of schools and instead SEL, character, et cetera, should be taught at home? Our kids lose when the argument is amongst the adults. And our kids win when they know they're at the center of every decision we make. And the truth is, this is not an either or. And I think that we need to do a much better job making sure that we frame the debate around them and not arguing about whether it's really the parents' fault or it's the teacher's fault. The truth is, it's everybody's responsibility and opportunity and blessing to be able to work with these kids. And I just think the better job that we can do and the more that we can remember that, I think the more progress we'll make.
Okay. Let's move on to a question that's pretty practical. What might be next steps in building an organized grassroots movement advocating for SEL across the country? What could make these efforts most effective?
I'll just give you one, to me, fairly obvious thing, and I hope this is in part responsive. You know, we have way too many, but we have hundreds, I suppose, of colleges of education in this country. And people from across the spectrum have pointed out deficiencies and imperfections in many of them. But it seems to me, you know, as Joyce pointed out, this will seem, no matter how well it's presented, like the next new thing, and veteran teachers are probably going to be a hard sell for some of them. They'll say, we've heard it all before, here it comes again. But if this is really going to be a broad movement and an enduring one, reaching people in the colleges of education. I've already spoken to ours and asked about others elsewhere. There's a long way. This is not the way tomorrow's teachers are being prepared, but it could be. And it would seem to me that's one place to look, and an essential place to look if you really want this report to get off the shelf and be of broad application.
Anyone else about next steps here? This is a great report, but everyone has the question, what comes after this report?
Well, I think it's easiest to build up movements if you can hold up heroes of the movement and create a narrative behind them. And there are so many fantastic examples, probably in virtually every school across our country. So let's celebrate the folks who are doing it right. Let's put some, let's put some messaging behind them. And I think, people like to follow folks who are having success. And I think there's a lot that, PTAs and teachers and parents across the country can do. I do agree that the less that this is top down and the more that this is organic, the better it's going to be.
I also think that parents generally have a lot of respect for educators. And I think people go into education primarily because they have a love for children and they really want to make a difference in kids' lives. So they actually start off with the right impetus. It's just how do we help them expand that and make it more a day-to-day type of involvement. And so I think it's something that, educators can be very helpful in terms of the way they do it, as well as teacher prep programs. It's interesting, Mitch, there's actually over 1,300 teacher prep programs in our country today, probably way too many. But the reality is many of them are missing the boat on this and not focusing on this. And how do we do more to do it? And I think really educators are one place would be a great place to start as role models and examples of loving or supportive individuals in kids' lives.
Before we get to the end, I do want to ask the question that is up there about how does SEL impact equity? Does it improve it? Does it make any difference at all?
It makes a great deal of difference. Because to relate that to that last question, I think we ought to start off giving the report to many people, educators I'm talking about at this point, and then let them talk to us and just listen as they give us their thoughts. But I think here's how it really matters. A school, of course, is a part of this larger ecosystem. People come there, the ones who are working there have their values, have their ways of doing things, they have their ideas about what character is and so forth. And so much of social and emotional development has to do with the way I was brought up and what my parents taught me and what my community told me. Those things can be very, very different. This is the place, I think, that black males and brown males will be advantaged probably more than anybody else if we can make this happen. Because then teachers, most of our teachers are not teachers who look like or have had the experience of those two groups. And I have seen with my own eyes over all these years of how the social and emotional development even of teachers, and that is so opposite, for example, for a black male, how those two things collided. And when they collide, guess what happens? The next thing you know, that person is sitting in the principal's office. The next thing you know, something else has happened, and one small thing happens we were talking about earlier. Because we didn't have that social and emotional ability to deal with something, it just burst and went out of control. This keeps kids from learning. This keeps teachers from being able to teach because you don't have a connection. That boy that hugged me and told me, I will never forget this, that I smell like yellow cake because that's what his mother makes, and she was loving and kind to him. This is the same kind of connection we need in the classroom so that I could teach them that it matters what Thoreau had to say. Because until that connection is made, it doesn't happen. And we have not, as Governor Daniel mentioned, we've not had these teachings in when we were prepared to be teachers. And so we just must understand that equity for a student is absolutely connected to how that teacher sees that student and how that teacher treats that student. Equity is not just money. Equity is also the extension of your mindset, how you treat kids, how you include them, how you try to be sure you understand their families. What happened to them last night? You didn't get your homework. Is it that you're just lazy? No, it may not be. There are all kinds of things that happen. Because you came from a family where you didn't get your homework, there was something big going to happen to you. Every time I hear somebody say that I didn't want my parents to know because this and this is going to happen, that's not true for most kids. And it leads to a very inequitable administration of discipline for that kid where somebody else might get encouragement.
Want to address that, Representative?
Well, I would agree with what Joyce says. I think it is a huge impact in equity. The one thing that in hearing her talk, that I think we kind of miss too, though, is that equity is also having teachers that look like many of the students. 40% of our students today are kids of color, and we do not have teachers that represent them. And that is a travesty because the expectations are so different, and I don't think it's bias necessarily. It's just the way our cultures are slightly different, and I think that's also a very important component when we look at, and it probably, SEL helps overcome that, but it doesn't take that into consideration.
Okay. That brings us to a close. I want to thank the audience for great questions. And please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists for their insights and their public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jill Violet, founder of Playworks.
Good morning. I am struck that somehow saying I am a recess expert is less badass than I am a neuroscientist. And yet, I am the grown-up who has been authorized to invite all of you, if you are able and so choose, to go ahead and stand up. Yes, I am that person. And if you are watching on the simulcast, I would also invite you to stand up as well. So at Playworks, we have spent the last 23 years, you can go ahead and wiggle a little if you want. We've spent the last 23 years really leveraging the power of play to build eye-popping school culture and climate that is designed for learning, social, emotional, and academic. We have seen that giving kids a chance to play every day enables them to be seen and to see others and to cross that bridge from inclusion to belonging. We know that actually giving kids a chance to play gives them a chance to exercise their own agency, to be drivers of their own education. And we know that actually play and recess are these incredible opportunities to build relationships with your peers and with the grown-ups in your lives, the caring, consistent grown-ups who, when they play with you, become more real and become people you can connect with and in whom you see yourself. So with that, we were going to play a game right here. We were going to give you a chance at experiential learning. So I usually get 2 responses from grown-ups. I'm visiting from the left coast, where play for grown-ups is all the rage. I just bring news of that from Silicon Valley. But there are two grown-up reactions. One is abject terror. The other is like, woo! So for those of you experiencing terror, I swear there will be nothing humiliating or weird about this moment. Just go with it. Don't worry. So 2 parts to the game. I think it's up there. The game is called Superstar. And the way Superstar is going to work in this theater setting for 300 grown-ups is that I'm going to ask you to get into groups of roughly 4 people, ideally with 2 people from each row. Now, the second part is that getting into the groups of 4 in the 2 rows is important. More important is that you look around and make sure that everyone in your vicinity is in a group. So I'm going to ask for us to practice a moment of being comfortable with the messiness of human interdependence and take care of each other. So I'm going to give you 12 seconds right now to get into a group of roughly 4 with everyone having a group. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi. Roger, you in a group? Get in a group. Find Roger. All right, if you can hear me, touch your elbows. If you can hear me, touch your shoulders. I'm glad you're doing that. That's good. All right. You got it? All right, the second rule. Are you in groups? You all, I can handle this with 500 elementary school students. I know I got you. Thank you, that's good. So now you've done it. This is a minor win, and these are crazy times, so celebrate the minor win and give everyone else in your group a high five. All right, this second rule, this is a very competitive moment. 47 seconds, and what I'm asking you to do is to find as many things in common in your group that all 4-ish of you have in common. And like, for example, liking green beans, having a brother, having seen Bohemian Rhapsody, it's something, those kind of things. The sky's the limit. You have 47 seconds, and then at the end of 47 seconds, we will determine which pod is, and I'm authorized to crown somebody, the Aspen Institute National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development Report Release Superstar Champion. Whew. Does anyone have any questions? All right, the magic word is love. When I say love, pro tip, decide ahead of time who's keeping track of the number of things you've said out loud and you all have in common. On your mark, get set, go. All right, I'm making an audible. Love. All right, we only have a few more seconds. Stop, time. All right. Touch your shoulders if you can hear me. Touch your head if you can hear me. You are doing well. All right, please, if you have 10 or more things, stay standing. If you have 20 or more things, stay standing. All right. Have a seat if you have less than 20 things. People, good people. Bump, bada, bump, bump. Bump, bada, bump, bump. Bump, bada, bump, bump. Good people. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. 1, 2, eyes on you. If you have, can you hear me? All right. If you have 25 or more things, please stay standing. Are there any groups still standing with 25 or more? I'm nominating this group, still standing. You all are the Superstar Champions. Thank you so much. We are pleased to announce that our report is also being released. 150 games with social emotional learning lessons tagged and indexed. Thank you so much. Play on.
If if it's gonna go up or straight.
Interesting. Strong relationships are central to the learning process.
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see.
For our second student spotlight, please welcome Diohanin Matos.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good, good. My name is Diohanin Matos, and I'm a site coordinator with communities and schools in the nation's capital. I've been with CIS for 3 years now, and it's been a privilege and a pleasure to work with high school students and middle school students at Cardozo Education Campus. One thing that keeps me coming back for more is the opportunities to really bridge a gap between community resources and student and familial needs, not only at the school, but in my immediate school environment in Ward 1 in Washington, D.C. And through this work, I've really had the pleasure of meeting hundreds of thousands of students and families. And today I'll be talking a little bit about just one student, and his name is Angelo Aguilar. He was going to be here with me today, but he got a little bit of a cold feet, but that's all right. That's what this work is about. And he's going to have many opportunities to sit in front of people just like you all and talk about how amazing he is. But let's see. So Angelo, he's been working with communities and schools with CIS for 5 years now, and I've known him for 3 years. And he had a fantastic relationship with the site coordinator before I got there. So by the time I came into Cardozo, it was pretty easy for him to understand what communities and schools was and how to articulate his needs, his wants, and his passions to me. I remember the first day we met, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, you're number 2, and you're gonna be number 1 until I get to know you." And I understood that because that spoke a lot to the relationship that he had with the past site coordinator. And it also spoke volumes on the audacity that he had as a young man, as a young 8th grader, to speak his mind and to just get to know a stranger. And in the beginning, we started working we started working on many different things, but the most important thing we were working on was just controlling his anger and controlling his emotions in general. Sometimes it was his happiness. Sometimes it was excitement. And Angelo's a very magnetic person. He attracts many people to him, and that can be a blessing and a curse because sometimes he can be the biggest leader, and he plays on the basketball team, and he can lead the team to win. And then other times he can be the biggest class clown, and he can really destroy a classroom if he's having a difficult day. So as we continue to work on mindfulness, we did a lot of breathing exercises. I connected him to a few organizations that worked on a journaling so he can write a little bit on how he feels and goal setting. And as we continue to work together, we started to really connect. And I got to, I opened up to him a little bit, and he opened up to me a little bit. And as our relationship developed, we were able to share different things about each other, and especially about his strengths in basketball, his strengths in the sciences, but also his needs at home, his needs in the streets, here in DC, and his aspirations. And through our relationship and with partnership with CIS and resources from communities and schools, we've been able to really just bridge that gap. A really powerful project that Communities and Schools has been working on is a Mosaic project that you all see behind me. And as you can see, Angelo's bright face, and he's a strong young man. And the Mosaic project really highlights different pieces of who he is. And Communities and Schools worked with several students all over the country. And Angelo is one of those students. And in the picture itself, you can see a basketball. He dreams to be in the NBA, and he's a sophomore now in our school at Cardozo. He's also into engineering, and he really that's his secondary passion aside from basketball. So we work every day to really connect him to those passions real time here in DC. Yeah, and you also see other items in the Mosaic itself. Like the food pantry that we have. There are a few select items of food because one of the biggest things that we've provided for Angelo is food so he can take home at home. And we have an open door policy at our school where anyone, even adults, can walk in and they can walk out with a bag of food. And that's been invaluable for our community, and it has been for Angelo when he's really been finding these resources. Yeah. I wish that he was here with me, but that's okay. I'll see him today when I go back to school. I think that the most important thing about Angelo and a little bit about who he is that he's a young person that understands relationships and understands the value in authenticity, right? And that's the conversation that we're having today, the power of relationships and the power of how relationships can transform someone's life. So as you continue to check out this portrait behind me, I'm glad you're taking pictures of it. It's very impressive. And Communities and Schools is gonna open up a lot more of these portraits in the coming weeks of different students from all over the nation. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Kavitha Cardoza and Latanya McDade, Sabrina Anderson, Joshua Garcia, and Shannon Simzak.
Good morning, everyone. I will start by saying I've been an education reporter for almost 20 years, and so much of the time I'm covering depressing news, right? Test scores are stagnant, teachers aren't being paid enough, every other country is doing better than us. And today I am so delighted to be here because we're talking about what works. We have representatives from two communities, Tacoma and Chicago, and we're going to talk about what they've done. They know it works and how we can share that. So thank you so much for being here. We have, like I said, representatives, and so we have different levels, the classroom, the school, the district, and the community. So I hope some of what we say is relevant to whatever level you are at. So let's start with why, right? Why, on top of everything else educators have to do, right? Why social emotional learning? Shannon, why don't you start?
So I've been teaching for about 9 years, and I feel like I've always taught the whole child before the whole child was a thing. But 2 years ago, I had a student. She was gay. She had a mother who was a drug addict, and she felt quite abandoned by her. And I quickly became her person at school. She would come in at lunch. We would chat all the time. I would check in with her. And one day I just had this random gut feeling that I needed to ask her if she was okay. Are you going to harm yourself? I can still picture myself asking her that. And she said, no, Miss Simzak, I would never do that, I promise, I promise. And I took that to heart. I believed her. A couple weeks later, she brought a box knife to school and slit her neck from side to side in my third period class in front of me, in front of my students. I'm happy to say she survived. I grabbed the knife before she could do any more damage. But it was at that moment that I realized my job was not just teaching language arts, how to write an argumentative paper. It was keeping some of my kids alive. It was being that person that my students could come to on a daily basis. I could be that role model for them. And that was when I really realized how important this SEL work.
That's great. Sabrina, what about you?
Well, we realized that we were meeting the academic needs of our students, but our students face so many issues, so we had to look at a bigger picture to teach them coping skills. So we really decided to begin implementing SEL so that we could teach our students, because one thing we realized, we can give them the academics, but in order to be able to basically survive in this world, you need coping skills, you need skills on how to build relationships. So we really had to hone in and work with our students on that. So meeting the whole child, giving them the academics, the skills, and these are skills that they're going to need to be college and career ready and to survive in society.
Latonya?
So I really want to give a little bit of context from the district perspective. I want to share a little bit about our district, starting with the fact that we have about 361,000 students, and close to 90% of that student population are students of color. Nearly 80% of our student population are students from socioeconomic backgrounds, which qualify them for Title I. And so when you look at that demographic and you look at what's happening in the world around us, you know, in Chicago, which many of you, I'm sure, have experienced this after, I'll go recent, after the election of 2016, what was happening for our young people in our city and the level of fear, particularly for our immigrants that emerged from that, we know that we have to address these issues that are happening within society. Race and class are highly politicized in American culture. And our classrooms and our schools are a microcosm of the world that we live in. So when you look at the social political context of schooling, it really mirrors what's happening in society. And so we can't ignore that fact. So when you have a district that is predominantly black and brown students, particularly students that are coming from distressed communities, you know, how do you not prepare them in a way that they're able to make sense and make meaning of the world around them? That's what's so critically important about social emotional learning for us. In our vision for Chicago Public Schools, we say that we want every student to be able to realize college, career, and civic life. That has evolved from life to civic life. And in order to do that, we know that students have to be equipped not just with the knowledge and the skills, but the habits of mind to be able to navigate the world around them, to be able to have a sense of identity, and to be able to have agency and authority both within the classroom and outside the classroom. We know that social emotional learning gets us that much closer to realizing that vision.
Thank you. Josh, what about you?
You know, in addition to everything that's been said, I think one of the other pieces for our why in our community was this, you can't teach what you don't know. Our why was not out of, purely out of crisis, but more out of also what we wanted for our community. If you look at the national headlines, the world headlines, I'm not sure this is the world that we want. And we needed to change the adults, because the kids have never been a problem. The kids come to us as gifts, and we unfortunately don't shape them the way that we should. And so we had to take a systematic step back as a community and ask ourselves, what do we value? What if they were all, each one of our children? And what is it that we're going to do differently to support them by starting with how do we change our own behaviors and beliefs?
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the context of race in class. I feel like so many times people don't want to talk about it, and I think it's just so critical that we do. So real quick, I am sure when you said, hey, this is what we're going to do, everyone embraced it and said this was a great idea, right? Tell me about some of the pushback. Josh, why don't you go?
Yeah, I think start off with this great work the commission started is bringing folks together from a various different beliefs and expertise. And the pushback, I think, in our culture is the yeah buts, the yeah buts. Yeah, but that's not what social emotional learning is. And yeah, but that's not this is, or that's not the way I talk about it. And what we had to do is take the expertise of the folks from Castle, from Yale, from Harvard, from our community, our kids, and we had to come up with our own plan. And that's a difficult process to create shared meaning around some very simplistic terms. So what does it mean to support the whole child? How will we go about it? How will we build infrastructure? Giving people time to create meaning. How will we teach kids how to learn versus what to learn? Were all critical challenges. And then you have the conversation around infrastructure. None of us do this work complete. And I think you have to admit that right off the bat. Your program, your philosophy, it's not as comprehensive as you think it is. And so you have to stop.
What is the accordion approach?
When you think about an accordion instrument, right? You take a concept and you bring it out to your community as far as you can, you get input, and you create that new meaning and you bring it back in and you shape a new definition and you keep on bringing it out, in and out. And that's what we've been doing for the last 7 years in Tacoma is creating this shared meaning around what does the Tacoma Whole Child Initiative mean? What does it mean to support the whole child? What does social emotional learning and academic development mean?
And that's really interesting because then it's never static. You're constantly defining, redefining, and moving.
As a nation, this report, we will learn more. Mr. Shriver said it last night, we've just begun the race. My biggest fear is that there's not a there after this. And that we don't take this work and say, well, now we know this, so what does that mean? Our culture is living and breathing, and we need to continue to learn.
Shannon, tell me about it in your classroom. Did you feel, oh my gosh, this is one more thing they're dumping on teachers?
For me, no, because it's not one more thing to teach, it's just how I'm teaching. So if I am teaching argument writing, it's not just, okay, here's our claim, here's our evidence, here's our commentary. It's, okay, if we're in a debate now, what does active listening look like? What is your body language showing the person that you are having this discussion with? It's just how I'm going about teaching it. It's, if you think it's something else on top of it, then your heart's not in it.
And what about pushback? Were any of the children?
It wasn't the children.
It's never the children.
It was not the children. It was the adults. So a lot of the times I would get the comments like, oh, you're friends with the kids.
God forbid.
Okay, so I know that he's a Dallas Cowboys fan and that when I get back home, he's gonna be super duper upset. But that's the way that I could build a relationship with them. I had to know who they were as human beings before I could teach them what a claim is. So I think the pushback was more, oh, you're just trying to be friends. You want to be the cool teacher. And there was no understanding of why I wanted to do that.
Did it take a lot of time out of your day to get to know the children? I mean, we always say, oh, get to know the children. Is it like this huge additional amount of work?
No. I'm in the hallway. So passing period, that's the perfect time to have what we call a 2x10 conversation. If I've got a student who is known to be the troublemaker, I will find him in the hallway. And I'm like, hey, what's up? Where'd you get those Jordans? We have like a quick conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with academics. I want to know who they are. That's during passing period. And then when I'm up around, working with the kids in the middle of class, I'm noticing that a girl has some anime on her binder, and she's writing about anime. So it's just a way to get to know them throughout the day. It does not take any more time.
Latanya, what about pushback you received at, Chicago public schools have been dealing with a lot of things over the last few years. How did people react?
We've come a long way, and we've been doing this work for quite some time, and like Josh stated, it has grown, and there's been several iterations. I would think that at the very beginning, when social emotional, the burgeoning research around social emotional learning kind of hit the scene in Chicago, it was more around this whole notion of it being a waste of instructional time. We as a district were battling, the academics and the test scores and all of the things that we know traditionally have defined what success is in school. And so it's kind of battling, and that's on both sides, both from the educational space in the classroom, from teachers, from principals, and even externally from parents who are saying, like, well, what are they doing? What about, I need my kids spending time reading, and not really understanding that the environment that builds a healthy student encompasses social emotional learning. We've come a long way from that time, and I think that one of the ways that we kind of battled against that or combated that was being really open, honest, and transparent with data, both qualitative and quantitative data, and research. We have an unprecedented relationship with the University of Chicago Consortium on Chicago School Research. We have a robust data sharing agreement with the university, which was so encouraging when I looked at the report and saw the recommendations that talked about having these external partnerships, and it specifically called out data sharing agreements. It's so critically important because for us, the University of Chicago, we call them our critical friends. They keep us honest and hold our feet to the fire. And when you have research that is public-facing, where everyone can see it, it not only holds us accountable, but it shows to our community, to our families, to our schools, and our parents where we have to focus our energy, our time, and our effort to improve as an entire school district. Really quickly, I want to call out an example. In 2015, the consortium released a report it was titled Suspending Chicago's Children, and it compared disciplinary practices across schools within the district. And it wasn't surprising to find that while it did highlight a lot of the advances that we've made in terms of decreasing out-of-school suspension and focusing on restorative practices, it also kept us honest in looking at the disparities and inequities that still exist in terms of the disproportionality of suspensions for African American and Latino males. And so it took a deeper dive in looking at disciplinary practices, and it wasn't surprising to find that in those schools where there weren't really strong disciplinary practices that focus on the whole child, that use social emotional learning practices and standards, those were the schools where you had higher percentages of students being suspended, out of school, or expelled, and those students were Black and brown students, particularly male students. So when you expose the data in a real meaningful way, and it's not just the district talking about it, but we're operating from a common set of facts, I think that goes a long way in building the kind of buy-in that we need, not just at the school level, but also in the community, to show that this work really matters and is critically important if we're ever going to get to that, the inequities that are systemic throughout so many districts in this country.
Mm-hmm. Sabrina, I want to move to you and talk about the school, but it's kind of jumping off something Latanya said, which is, often there's this feeling that social emotional learning is something kind of extra, and, poor minority kids need academics, reading, writing, science, and the extracurricular, the anything extra is kind of like not what we should be focusing on. Tell us a little bit about pushback you received.
Well, first, our teachers, they looked at it as something extra to do, something extra to add to their lesson plans. But we had to first give them the professional development, provide them the resources, and let them know this is not anything extra. And I can say from experience that when I first became an instructional leader 13 years ago, I was one of the schools where we were suspending students because teachers didn't know how to handle them. So we had to give them those skills, those strategies, those coping techniques to know what it is we need to do with these students, because many of our students, they have a lot of issues. They have things that they bring to school with them daily. So I had to work with the teachers. We established a SEL team, and we gave the teachers the professional development they need, resources they need that they could use within the classroom. And so really, it's not an extra lesson that you're doing. each day. You're just embedding it and integrating it into what you're already doing. So I work with my teachers, for example, around literacy. So even just looking at some of the novels, let's read a novel with your class. Let's talk about the characters that are in that book. So it's all about SEL, and each morning we do a morning meeting, every classroom from pre-K through 8. So this is a time that the teachers can talk about, students can share what they're feeling for the day. If there's, anything going on that they need to discuss, any issues that they've had. So yes, in the beginning it was a pushback, but now it has truly paid off because we are not suspending students anymore, and we've come up with different strategies and techniques to help students, face their needs.
So I'm going to jump in over here, and I want you to repeat or share the glitter bottle story that you told me about backstage.
Yes, so in each of our classrooms, we have a peace center. And so in our peace center, it just has rules and strategies that you can use to calm down. So it's actually a calm down bottle, and it's just a bottle of water. We put glitter in it. And so when students have issue or two students may have a conflict, they have to go to the peace center. And so once they go to the peace center, you have to turn the bottle upside down and you watch the glitter flow down. And of course, it takes a little time. And so by then, the students are talking to each other how they can handle the conflict and calm them down. And when you're there by yourself, you're looking at that glitter and it's just going slow. And so eventually, after you watched all of this glitter go down to the bottom of the bottle, you've calmed down. And our students, they enjoy it. And the funny part about it is I've had parents come to me and they're like, Ms. Anderson, what is a calm down bottle? My child said I have to make one at home for us.
Do they look at you like, are you a real principal,
Yes.
and is this a real school?
And so one thing actually that we did at one of our family literacy nights, we allowed the parents to make a calm down bottle so that they could, take it home. And it's something that they could use in the home. So
Forget
it worked
home,
quite well.
take it to work, yeah. Josh, absolutely, jump
Yeah,
in.
I just want to jump in. Social emotional academic development is not just for kids of color and poor kids. It's for every kid. It's for every adult. It's for all of us. And we really need to remember that. The other thing is schools aren't here to fix kids, right? And so when you talk about pushback and you anticipate this, you have to learn from the expertise that a lot of folks are doing social, emotional, and academic development, including our after-school partners or before school or out of school time, including our parents and including our neighbors. And so if you're not engaging them in that and coming to the place where, as a school leader, you can also learn from that expertise, we're going to miss the boat. We're going to miss the piece here. This is for all kids, 24/7, 365 days a year.
Thank you. Some of you have talked a little about this already in bits and pieces, but I'm going to ask you to share whether you have, what are you doing that's different? What does this look like practically at your level? Who are the partners that you talked a little bit about but who are the critical partners you feel have helped in these efforts? Just as practical as you can get.
I'll start out.
Sonia?
I talked about our partnership with the research side of it, but I also want to really quickly, and I know so many of you in the room will agree with this, CASEL has been a critical partner for us. I mean, CASEL has been doing this work for over 2 decades now, and since we started on this journey of SEL, CASEL has been there. And I think that it's important to, even when you look at their theory of action, it is ever evolving. And they stay abreast of the research and current practices and help us to collaborate across districts so that we can learn from one another. Because sometimes when you start this work, you feel like, it's such a heavy lift, like where do I go from here? How do I get started? And it can be, in some respects, discouraging when you think about all that is ahead of you in that journey. But when you have districts that you can collaborate with, that you can see where they start, and then those districts that are exemplary, it makes the work easier for you to manage and to digest and to understand. They give us tools and protocols for how we can communicate and do exactly what we just talked about here in terms of, gauging buy-in. And so I think it's important to have those partnerships that help you along the way in the journey, help you get started, and then also do the pressure test to make sure you're doing the right work at the right time and using the right kinds of research and data. So that's one of the ways that I think is critically important for us to make sure that we're partnering with experts in the field that can help us along the way.
And Sabrina and Latanya, why don't you talk very briefly about the Chicago Supportive School Certification Program?
So I'll kind of give an overview, and Sabrina, her school has gone through the process, and Garvey is a school we're so incredibly proud of in the work that they're doing because they represent one of our exemplary schools. So around 2014, I'll say, we adopted the standards, the school climate standards. And so right now we have a supportive school certification process. So in CPS, we love these badges of they're like badges of honor that go on the school report card. We have a healthy schools, we have a creative arts, and we also have a supportive schools. And what the beauty of it is it gets the community involved as well, because you have parents coming and saying, well, why doesn't my school have the certificate for supportive schools, or why doesn't my school have the healthy schools certificate? So it's a good way to get families involved and engaged with what's happening within their school community. And so through the certification process, schools take the school climate assessment. From that assessment, they develop an action plan that, kind of speaks to what they learned from that assessment. And then they also have a site visit where they have to show evidence of the work that they're doing around social emotional learning. Really, it focuses on 4 key areas, and help me out if I missed something here. But relational trust, right? Looking at school-wide environment and leadership, SEL instruction and student engagement, and then the last piece being, I can't think of it. Oh, how could I forget? Emotional and physical safety. So those 4 key areas. And so Sabrina, her school went through the entire process, and she can talk a little bit around the indicators and how you actually get to one of these 3 areas. You can be emerging, you can be established, or you could be exemplary. And there's a lot to be said about a school that is emerging, which is why we really value that classification, that you don't attempt the certification, and unless you're exemplary, you don't get the badge, right? There's honor in schools that take that step forward towards being emerging.
Yes, so actually Garvey is an exemplary school, and we have worked at it. And just to mention that you have to do this certification every 2 years. So you begin off, actually you have to do the action plan like she mentioned earlier. You have to do a school climate action plan. And so once you put that action plan in place, then there are indicators that you must meet. So we have 8 indicators, and one of them includes like our CIWP, which is our continuous wide in school improvement plan, which has to show that we're doing SEL. We have to show that we have partnerships. So we have various partnerships. I have various partnerships that I work with within my school that come in and work with my students. We have family counseling. We have different agencies that come in and do group counseling and restorative practice counseling with our students. So you have to show that you're doing SEL within your classrooms, that teachers are getting professional development around it. So it's a lot of work in it, but it is worth it to be an exemplary school. And it's also good because they have schools that are emerging, and they do the action plan, so it's a start. Just because you don't get to exemplary, but over the years, as it progresses, you continue to work towards that exemplary to make sure that you're there and meeting all the needs of the students and have all the components in place. And like I said, one of the important factors is the bringing in different agencies and communities to help to support that. One in particular that we have an organization that comes in that's called HELP. And so it helps us with counseling, but we have a behavioral health team that comes in. So she counsels our students, and we look at those Tier 2 and Tier 3 students to see what it is we can give them, just not around academics, but around their attendance. So just really looking at that certification, and it is an honor to have, but you have to work together, and the entire school community is working together to get us to that place.
I'm going to ask Shannon and Josh to talk a little bit about what Tacoma is doing that's different.
So at my school, I'm at Stewart Middle School in Tacoma, go Panthers. We have a restorative coach. So she was hired specifically to work around restorative practices between students and teachers. And so anytime a student has been assigned a consequence, she brings them in, they have a conversation. Sometimes that means you need to bring in another student to have a conversation and work through it. And it has really decreased our suspension rate. It has really helped with building those relationships between teachers and students. Teachers are showing they're vulnerable, they're willing to own up, hey, I made a mistake. This is how we're gonna work through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having that restorative coach has been life-changing at our school.
Great. Josh?
Oh, I don't know about different. That conversation around partnership, I think, is so critical. A few things that come to mind is it's really difficult to help folks understand that it's not one partner. It's multiple partners. And partners play different roles. Sometimes you have thought partners, sometimes there's policy partners, sometimes there's actual people that provide direct services to kids. And when you start to use data and start to ask yourself who's doing what, you start to have some really honest and difficult conversations and saying maybe we don't have the impact that we think we have. And so we're really trying to use data to drive our actions and supports for kids that are driving policies. So, we automatically enroll kids in advanced classes and their parents have to opt them out. Ultimate parent engagement, right? Parent gets to decide, not us. We pay for them to take the exams. We give them a variety of things. We have an elementary sports program in partnership with the Metro Parks, the YMCA, and the Boys and Girls Club, where sports are held right here on the campus. What's unique about that? Our high school kids write the coach's curriculum based off of our SEL competencies. So it's not about building better athletes, but building better citizens. Our city has done aligned funding with their Health and Human Services grants to community agencies that says you get a prioritization if you're working with students in the Tacoma Public Schools under the Tacoma Whole Child Initiative. So we're able to distribute resources differently. Our Greater Tacoma Community Foundation has, in support with the Wallace Foundation, has helped build infrastructure around how do we know who we're serving, what is the dosage, and supports. I think the other thing that we're really proud of is this idea of total, functional, and continuous. Total meaning everyone has a role in supporting the whole child, not just schools, everyone. It's got to be functional. It doesn't mean that it has to be complex, it just has to be comprehensive. And we can never quit. It's got to be constant or continuous.
We've got a few more minutes, but so one last question and then I'm going to jump into questions. The fun stuff that everyone is at the back of every educator's mind, right? Budget. How do we pay for this? Because like a restorative coach costs money, having programs costs money. And also measurement. What have you seen since implementing this program? Should we just go down the line? Sabrina?
Okay, well, I'll let her talk about the budget, but but from the school level, well, I will say in our district, like we have a network SEL specialist. So that specialist provides the training to our staff. So that's already there. That's something that's already a part of the district. So we have monthly sessions. So he provides that professional development. And you just kind of have to go out and look for those resources. I have a lot of agencies that we work with, and CPS, they have a lot of agencies that they recommend that kind of give us those free, services. So just really kind of working, or you have to write those grants. So I have a team, so we work on finding, those various resources. So there is a little budget and there's money, honestly, I can say this year there's money to do exactly what it is we need to do.
I think for us, I mean, in any organization, there's always going to be, you'll always be, in some respects, strapped for resources when you have competing priorities. But the key word is priority. And so for Chicago Public Schools, social emotional learning is a priority. And just like in your home, when you have a budget, you prioritize those things that you can't go without, that you have to allocate the resources for. And then those things that, you know what, if we don't have this, we'll be okay. For us, we won't be okay without social emotional learning. So we prioritize our dollars for what we believe matters the most. And it speaks volume for our schools, for our principals who are trying to create the right kinds of supportive environments for their students, and not just for their students, but for their teachers also. For our teachers, teachers have to see it in districts where, you know, you come out with an initiative. Sometimes our teachers want to wait us out and say, you know what, this too shall pass. But when you put the funding behind an initiative, and I don't even see social emotional learning as an initiative. I see this as the way that we do school. I think that when, as a district, you prioritize what's important, you fund that effort, and it's sustainable over time, then it becomes the nature and the fabric of who you are as a school district and what you believe in. So we don't worry about the funding for things that we know we must have. And I'll also say, too, in Chicago, we have just such a strong ecosystem of support where we have foundations that want to support the work that we're doing. They just want to know that we're committed to it. And when we show that level of commitment, we do have the supports that come in, the financial dollars that come in to help us to continue this critically important work.
Shannon?
I don't get paid enough to deal with budgets. My budgets are pencils and books. But I do know at my school, my principal definitely prioritizes SEL and AVID. AVID has been a huge help and an easy way for us to integrate SEL. So our district is a huge supporter of AVID and has funded that at all of our middle schools. So that is one thing I will speak to, but the rest I'll leave to my boss.
Okay. Josh, apparently you get paid enough to answer this question.
That's debatable. I think one of the first things I'd encourage folks to do when we started this is we called it a braiding initiative. We started to say, so we have 34 benchmarks that we have established as a community of priorities for our kids. And we asked ourselves, so what initiative is targeting which benchmark? And we found that we had 34 pages of Excel spreadsheets of perceived initiatives or real initiatives that we were not really doing with fidelity. And so we've learned from the business community to do lean practices, to reprioritize. This is the way that we do our work. The other piece is, you know, there's these 4 shifts in our Tacoma Whole Child Initiative: shift 1, the schools; shift 2, the after schools; shift 3, the families; shift 4, the partnerships. We don't want all the money. We want investment in each of the shifts. And so we're not saying to folks, come and invest in the schools. We're saying invest into what's relevant to help support the whole child along those lines. As far as results, in 2010, we had 55% graduation rates. Every comprehensive high school was labeled as a national dropout factory from U.S. News report. Last week, we hit 89.3% graduation rates. What's great about that is over, I think, nearly 79% of our total high school population is taking one college-level class and passing. Discipline rates dramatically decreasing, extracurricular environments increasing. The kids in Tacoma, kids across this world, kids across your communities, they can do it. You just need to get out of their way and then get really behind them and support, not in front of them.
Can I just share a little bit too? Yeah, clap for
Tacoma's doing something right.
Yeah, but you know, we've got bragging rights too. So I want to share. I did share some of the data just really quickly, and Josh kind of reminded me of it. We also are experiencing an all-time high graduation rate. Right now, we're at 78%, when in 2012, just barely half of our student population was graduating. So we're really excited about that. Out-of-school suspension is down 76%. In-school suspension is down 41%, expulsions down 59%. So we're really excited about the work that is happening also, and data is so important to measure success and effectiveness of the work that you're doing.
Okay, we've got a little bit of time, so let me quickly get to, I'm going to combine several questions that kind of are variations on the same thing. How does SEL relate to kids who are undocumented, kids who have been traumatized, kids who speak English as a second language, who are learning disabled? Do you all make any differences in implementation?
You know, I want to make a little bit of shift in terms of answering this question. I think too often we spend too much time focusing on what is perceived to be wrong with our students, and we don't take enough of a microscopic look at ourselves as educators in schools and how we're positioning our schools and creating hospitable environments for students to be able to thrive regardless of what they're bringing to the table. And so I think that for every school community, the way that you implement the strategies to support students will be different, right? Depending upon the population that you serve, you know, who you partner with, what resources you need has to speak to the needs of the students. But I think that across the board, more focus has to be on the adult learning that has to take place and meeting the learning demands of the adults that are creating these safe spaces and nurturing environments for students. So I think that really should be more of the focus, which is, again, encouraging the nation's report and the recommendations, which really talks about the need for us to engage in the right kinds of practices for teachers, professional learning, and support for adults, and creating a climate of adult learning within our districts and within our schools so that, you know, educators can take a hard look at even themselves and what they're bringing to the table based on how they're positioned within the dominant culture, so that we can fight against some of the stereotypes and the implicit bias that is permeating throughout our classrooms that speaks to exactly what you said, where you start to look at students from all of those different aspects than just looking at our students for who they are, the identity that they have, the agency and authority and voice that they're bringing to the table.
That's a kind of bird's eye view. Shannon, tell me from the ground level, do you implement it differently for different students?
So for me, my goal, well, I'll be honest, if I went back 2 years prior to my experience, my goal was to save my kids. And after this experience, that's not right. That's not it. We need to teach our kids how to be advocates for themselves. And I think SEL is a way, no matter what their background is, who they are, it's to be able to advocate for themselves.
You have to consider all those different lenses in your plan and support. There's no way, I mean, don't pretend yourself that you can say, well, I have in a diverse community, ELL students, simple things like respect. What does respect mean? When we looked at our discipline rates, a lot of the progressive discipline came from disrespectful behavior, but we never had a definition that we shared with kids or co-created, more importantly, with kids. And when we did that, results dramatically changed across the board. We have to have symbolic commitments. This is a January Nation at Risk, Nation to Hope. Every January should be Whole Child Month across the nation as a recommitment to budgets, as a recommitment to our support and our efforts. We've got to do those things and teach people regularly that this is what SEL and academic development is. And we cannot just say, well, this is our approach, without saying, who are we trying to serve first, and what are they bringing, and how will we adjust, provide additional support, create common language definitions.
So we've got less than 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you one sentence each, right? This is something we have not really touched on. But how do you involve families, like one strategy or one thought to involve families in this effort? Josh, you want to go first?
Simple thing at home, across the board, is behavior matrix. So what does respect mean at home? And we're able to teach ourselves and our staff what the child is bringing, as well as start a conversation of what that means and not assume that everyone's had that conversation at home.
So at Stewart, instead of us doing an open house at the beginning of the year where the teachers just talk, this is my classroom, we invite the families and the students in, and we ask the parents, What are the strengths and weaknesses of your child? Tell us about your child because you know your child better than we do.
Latanya?
I would say engaging parents and community as true partners in education and not just participants. So making sure that they are a partner with us in education and elevating the student voice, both at school and at home. Student voice matters, and we have to listen to the voice of our students, both in the home and in the school. And when we engage parents as partners in education, we're able to do that on both sides, so the student feels that they have a sense of identity and voice.
And Sabrina?
Well, one way that I do it is definitely involving my parents. And so one thing that I do in particular is I have a parent tea talk each month. So it allows parents the opportunity to come in and we can discuss and they can give feedback on things that they're thinking and we can share. So they can actually walk around and visit a classroom so they can see what's going on in the classroom. So really just actively bringing those parents in and making them feel a part of the school and just having that partnership with them.
Well, thank you very, very much for sharing your expertise. Thank you for listening. That's it.
The purpose of the National Commission is to start a conversation, right? But also to inspire change.
Bringing together leaders from across sectors, young people themselves, parents, educators, administrators, scientists, practitioners, policymakers, governors.
We have the possibility of creating an evidence-based, collaborative spirit focused on child development for all kids in the United States.
This report will really give us a roadmap to take what's known and be sure that it gets translated directly into action.
If we can accomplish what we've seen in a number of school districts already happening and help to scale that, then I think we will drive phenomenal growth.
Ladies and gentlemen, now please welcome Commission Co-Chair Jorge Benitez and Joshua Bolton, Becky Pringle, and Mark Morial.
Good morning. Let me try that again. Good morning. Excellent, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and we have a distinguished group here that I'll introduce here in a second. As I think you heard, my name is Jorge Benitez. I've had the pleasure of being one of the 3 co-chairs on the commission over the last couple of years. It's been an amazing ride. I've always had a passion for education, but it became deeply personal for me when I started to understand the things that were getting in the way of our children's thriving in K-12 education. The parent of 2 kids, and I have 2 grandkids, so this is something that I'm in the mood to take on, right, for them and for everyone else. My background is in business, and as a corporate leader, I'll tell you that I want to echo what was said earlier today, because the businesses are ready for this, right? I mean, they currently lack the talent that they need to be able to thrive in their organizations, and so if we could help develop children through the skills that we've talked about and that we've seen evidence through this, then I think businesses will have the talent they need to be able to drive. And that was what I saw when I ran a large organization here in the U.S. So I'm very optimistic, and I'm deeply energized by what we've heard throughout the morning and what we'll hear about today, because this panel is all about hearing what a number of groups are already doing, right? Because when you think about having to implement all these changes, it could seem a little daunting, but the reality is that there's a number of things, as you've heard in the prior group and others, that are already taking place, and there are success stories out there that we need to understand. And so we're going to talk a bit about this. But we're motivated. I think we have the practice, the policy, and the research base to really drive the kinds of actions that we need to take. And what I'll tell you is that we have a ton of support. As a matter of fact, we're going to start to show some of the organizations that are already taking action and are supporting these efforts on an ongoing forward basis, right? So I'm very energized about this, and I'm really happy that all 3 of you are here. Let me just quickly introduce our panel, and we'll get on to the questions here. So Josh Bolton is the CEO of the Business Roundtable, a group of about 200 organizations that are the largest companies in the country. And there's a huge investment being made in their time and energy in the context of education, and Josh will tell us more about that. Becky Pringle, who's Vice President of the National Education Association, who's the largest teacher unions in the country, and she's here to share the perspectives of teachers and what they're doing in this context. And Mark Morial, who is the President and CEO of the National Urban League, who has a very impressive resume. We'll hear more about him and his different roles and the kinds of things we're doing. So thank you all for being here. Let me start, Josh, with you, if I may. As a man of many careers in the private sector, government, higher education, and nonprofit, what do you feel is the most important skill, right, that you have learned to help you with all those efforts?
Well, first, Jorge, thank you for including me, and thanks for that nice advertisement for the Business Roundtable. One item that you didn't say about the Business Roundtable, and Jorge knows this because when he was CEO of Accenture, he was a member of the Business Roundtable, but it's 200 CEOs who collectively employ over 17 million people. So these are folks who are the customers, the consumers of what our education system is producing, and they are very concerned about it. Something I've picked up from each of from many of the leaders, many of those 200 leaders, and that I've learned in my own career in government, in education, and now at the Business Roundtable, is I think the most important skill that I've picked up along the way that has been useful to me has been listening. I say with all humility that humility may be among the most important qualities for leaders in any kind of enterprise. And the skill that I've absorbed from the people whom I admired in government and the people I've admired in business, and that I hope is increasingly part of the agenda in teaching our next generation, is to be a good listener and learner, because nobody comes out with all the wisdom that they need. Nobody is successful without the inputs of a lot of different people, and I think if one of the products of the excellent work, Jorge, that you and your commission have done, is to emphasize in our educational system the skill of listening to be a good learner, I think that will go a long way toward meeting the needs of the next generation of good workers in this country.
Thank you, Josh. Becky, you got your start in education as a middle school science teacher. Thank you for that. But when you think back to what made you want to become a teacher, right? What was it that inspired you? And is there a particular skill that early on was really important and resonated with you that helped you to become a teacher and ultimately be a very successful one?
So let me begin by saying that I am so incredibly excited and encouraged and hopeful by what the work of the Commission has done around socio-emotional learning and connecting it to cognitive learning. And we're so excited at the NEA to be a part of that. I always wanted to be a teacher. From the time I forced my two sisters to play school on the front steps of our North Philly home, to the day I had to tell my father that I was going to become a teacher. You see, he did not want me to go into the teaching profession. He had fought a long, hard battle to make sure that his little black girl had every opportunity to go into any profession that she chose. I love science, and so he thought that that would be what I would choose. But the day that I told him that I had to become a teacher, he was more than a little bit disappointed. You see, my father was a teacher, history teacher in the school system in Philadelphia. And had already started to see the erosion of the respect and the resources and support for folks going into that profession. And as a black woman, he wanted me to go into a profession that was not as traditional as teaching. But a teacher I became because I watched my father all my life be able to combine his talent with his passion. You see, his talent was the ability to understand history and make connections to learning about and changing for the future what we needed to change to make sure that this world was what it must be for all. His passion were students. And so I saw him connecting with students every single day, and that's what I wanted to do. And so it was my father, unfortunately for him, that encouraged me to go into teaching. I would have to say that as a science teacher for over 30, none of your business years, I have to say that probably the scientific method for me, you know, it was all about identifying a problem and then coming up with a hypothesis, making some predictions, and then doing some experimentation and making some observation, analyzing data, and then ultimately coming to conclusions. It was about those critical thinking skills that are embedded in the work that we do in science, and quite honestly, in all of our disciplines in school, that had the greatest impact on me as I went through my K-12 schooling.
Thank you, thank you. Mark, let me continue with you. If you read the first lines of your bio, it says something very impressive. It says entrepreneur, lawyer, professor, legislator, mayor, and you're still not done, I'm sure, but you're presently the CEO of the National Urban League, a very esteemed organization. And so when I think about your background, the first question I have is, why does entrepreneur go first? And what skill set do you think early in your K-12 education really helped you to become all those things?
Well, first of all, let me just thank the leaders, members, and all the people who worked on the commission, and also my co-panelists. The National Urban League's honored to have been a part of this effort, and really looking forward with great anticipation to the work ahead to implement some of the recommendations that have come out of this report. So an entrepreneur, that word is a combination of the word enterprise and the word adventurer. That's what entrepreneur is made of. And I think that in everything that I've had the privilege and opportunity to work on, it's been an entrepreneurial spirit, which is a spirit of risk-taking, the spirit of taking a chance that has guided that. I am a lawyer by trade, went to Georgetown University Law School, took the obligatory path, and joined a major law firm when I got out. I was there for 2 years. And then I decided to just take a jump, take a leap. My mama thought I was nuts because I had student loans to pay. Why would you give up security and a chance to move up the ladder to go start your own law firm? And I did, and it was a risk. When I first ran for public office at age 26, and later on when I ran for mayor, I was faced with, you're too young, you're not ready, you're not prepared. It was a major risk. I think the spirit of entrepreneurship is the spirit of risk-taking. In the traditional sense, it's risk-taking to build a business. But I think what entrepreneurs do and what an entrepreneurial spirit does is someone who will push the envelope and push the level of expectations. And to a great extent, what we're doing here with this kind of work is really bringing the spirit of entrepreneurship to education, to how we raise our children. When I look at the great blessings of my life and in my career, and I think about the work of this commission and the recommendations, it is really that we have to think about education as a component of what I like to call, and I'm borrowing this from a great Yale educator by the name of James Comer, and that is, it's a concept of raising children. It's a concept of how you raise children to be good citizens, good workers, good leaders, and formal education, or what happens in the school, is a component of it, a central component, an important component. So my life was shaped by school, but my life was shaped by family. My life was shaped by the recreation programs that I participated in. My life was shaped by summer employment opportunities. My life was shaped by the people in the neighborhood where I grew up, who range from people who are great actors to people who are living their entire life in a penitentiary. That's the neighborhood I grew up in. It went from this far, this people who have achieved greatness, to people who've had the most difficulties in life. So I think that when we think about this, there's something commonsensical about this. And what's commonsensical about it is that for us to raise the next generation, we have to imbue them with a range of skills. And what this is all about is we have to be intentional about it. Maybe we just trusted that it would just kind of happen because of the social compact of the 1900s or the 20th century. I think now we have to be much more intentional about it because of the diversity, because of the changing family structures, because of the mobility, because of globalization, because of all of the things that are occurring. And we at the National Urban League have positioned ourselves, one, to be an advocate, to push for the types of equity-based reforms that these issues need, but also a practitioner, because we are in the after-school, out-of-school time, early childhood space in a very big way. So we see, and we do, in addition to thinking and sort of planning and advocating. So, you know, we're proud to be here, and I would be certainly remiss if I did not acknowledge the presence of my predecessor, Hugh Price, who's here in the audience, under whose leadership a lot of the contemporary work we're doing now got started with his Campaign for African American Achievement. We built on that in doing what we do now, which is our Equity and Excellence Initiative, which is about advocacy, it's about being a practitioner, it is about pushing reform, but pushing it through the lens of equity and excellence and understanding that the two go hand in hand. So all I would say about my experiences in life, and just, you know, one of the great sort of things I learned, I'm 15 years old, I got an opportunity to work in a mailroom at a big foundation that ran community health centers around New Orleans. And I was assigned to the mailroom, and the supervisor of the mailroom took me aside the first day. He said, "Look, son, this is how this works. See," he says, "a lot of people around here are taking their time working. They're going to take all day. They're going to procrastinate till the end of the day. Here, we're going to get our work done. So we're going to get everything done by about noon. And then at noon, I'm going to run some errands. And you're going to be in charge of this mailroom for 2 hours. If anybody calls, you do not know where I went." So it was sort of a lesson, and this guy was super organized, moved with speed and dispatch. He said, "Get your business done, and then you'll have all the time you want for yourself." But there was so many lessons that you learn from the practical elements of life, and I think giving children meaningful, realistic experiences, you know, whether it's sports, whether it's the arts, whether it's job and career exploration opportunities, is important. It's critical to supplement, to be a component and a part of what they get in the classroom or in the school space. They have to go hand in hand, and we've got to see all elements as being part of a whole, and I think that's what this movement is all about.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. By the way, you'll be encouraged to know that Dr. Comer and Dr. Price are in the room.
Well, Dr. Comer's here.
And
Okay.
they have been an integral part of this process since the very beginning. And so the product very much reflects their thinking. But let's continue the dialogue in the context of implementation, right? Because one of the things that many of us have been concerned about is we could have this beautiful, wonderful final report that frankly sits on the shelf and doesn't really get implemented. And that would just be wrong, right? And so we've seen too much impetus and desire for change to let that happen, right? So when I think about that, can you briefly share from your organizations the kinds of things that you're doing in support of the recommendations we come up with, and really add a little bit more detail to the kinds of things that are taking place now? Because I want everyone to know that we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of things that are taking place already that we can build on and we can share. And I think many of those things are being done within your organization. So, Josh, let me start with you.
Well, Jorge, for context, let's take a look at the employment landscape that each of our 200 CEOs have to deal with every day, and it's a great moment to be having this conversation. For many years, every year the Business Roundtable takes a survey of our CEOs, asks them about business and what they think the economy is doing, GDP, and so on. And once a year we ask a question: what's the biggest headwind to your business? What's the biggest cost pressure that you would like to have addressed? And for years, the answer was regulation. That was the biggest headwind that the CEOs of these major corporations were facing, and regulation won by a wide margin. Last year, when we asked that question, so this is at the end of 2017 when we asked the question, for the first time, labor came first. It just nosed out regulation as the biggest headwind that America's major corporations are facing. This year, when we asked the question, and we asked it just a couple of months ago at the end of 2018, labor won by a wide margin. It's now by more than 2 to 1. It's ahead of regulation and every other cost pressure that corporations are facing. So in addition to our CEOs always having themselves a very strong instinct and caring about the people who are coming through our education system and will be their employees in the future, it's now their biggest business concern. And so every single one of them is engaged in some way in working in the communities where they do business to try to make sure that the education system is producing people who are prepared to do the jobs that they have. And they have jobs in this economy to fill. Right now, many of them are coming together in what we call workforce partnership initiatives. And we've got 11 of them now around the country. We're adding some every few months. And that's where several of our CEOs come together in a region where they're doing business with local government, with local schools, community colleges, universities, with labor, and with the philanthropic community. And they try to design a program that will help prepare high school and early college kids for the jobs that they have to fill. So they're working together to design a curriculum, to create apprenticeship programs, to create summer programs that will help kids who, especially those from less privileged backgrounds, help them be ready to take the jobs that they have to offer. Several of our companies are also reaching even farther back, and they're going to K through 12 education, mostly in high school now. And they're trying to create opportunities for those kids who traditionally have not had the opportunities through formal education to get the preparation that they need. I'm thinking, for example, of Best Buy. Everybody knows Best Buy, where you get your electronics and so on. And you've probably heard of the Geek Squad, which are those young people who actually know how to turn your computer on and make it work. And what Best Buy does is that they organize a bunch of their Geek Squad employees, and they volunteer their time, and they provide basically a free seminar for kids from underprivileged backgrounds to come up the learning curve on the technology and teach them what Geek Squad people do and what they know. And in the process of that, they're also interacting with these kids and showing them, this is the job that I do, this is how I do it. And they're helping them develop the soft skills that are so important that you just can't get in a traditional classroom. They're helping them know how to interact with customers and how to interact with fellow employees, to be hopefully eventually good members of the Geek Squad themselves, and maybe somebody that's going to design and advance some new technologies. So our companies, your companies, all of the names that you know, almost every one of them is working hard now to create the kind of environment where the high school kids, where the college kids can get the exposure and education that they need to be prepared to do the many jobs that our employers now have open today. And I think the good news is that there's real progress being made, and I think the work of the commission and the recommendations that you have for the education system overall are all pushing in the same direction.
Excellent, thank you. Becky, share with us a little bit about what the educators are, how they're primed for action.
So let me start with the mission of the NEA. Our mission talks about uniting our members and the nation to fulfill the promise of public education so that not one, not some, but every single student, every one of them, can succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. And so as we think about the core meaning of that mission, we structure our work as a union around what we call our 3 pillars: our traditional advocacy, our professional issues, and our social and racial justice advocacy. And as we think about the work on social and emotional learning, it absolutely is an extension of what we've been doing at the NEA. And I really want to applaud, Jorge, I really want to applaud the commission for starting with listening to students, listening to parents, listening to educators, listening to community leaders, business leaders, listening so that they could get it right. And that's one of the things that we've done over the last 15 to 20 years at the NEA is we've listened to educators. We don't just have members who are teachers. We have counselors and nurses. We have education support professionals and higher ed faculty. And what's so beautiful about that is that we approach our work from a place that we understand that for our students, all of them to be successful, we have to see them as the whole person they are. And so that bus driver who meets them at the very beginning of the day can set the tone for that child's emotional needs, or not, right? We know that that teacher who designs that science lab, where they are collaborating together, can actually capitalize on that social interaction that we heard about earlier in our earlier panels. And so we look at that work, and we know that we inherently know that it's right. But make no mistake, we have work to do, and so we've started that work. And we think about our work as a continuum. So we talk about our aspiring educators, and you heard that on one of the other panels. What do we need to do differently as we prepare teachers? And so we're working collaboratively, for example, with the organization that accredits teacher preparation programs, CAPE. And we talk about the INTAS standard, Standard 1, that really delves into the social and emotional development of students and requires that teachers or students who are preparing to become teachers actually develop an understanding of how that impacts their ability to learn. And so we're talking about that front end of the continuum, but we're not stopping there. Of course, we know that we have millions of teachers who are in the system right now who need ongoing professional development, not only in the brain research and science that we heard about earlier today, but to truly understand the uniqueness of every student. 3 years ago, our large convention, 10,000 teachers and support professionals, educators all over the country gathered together, and they made a decision that they were going to commit the NEA to taking on institutional racism. Now, we know that education is only one part of that of the impact on kids. We know that there is structural racism in this country, and the education system is part of that. And we as educators had a role and responsibility to assure that that every student had access and opportunity and equity throughout the system, and that we had to take a look at ourselves as educators. We needed to take a look at ourselves to make sure that we understood what it meant to have the skills to actually implement restorative practices, to actually create an environment that valued and respected every single student so they did feel safe and they did feel supported so they could learn. And so we took that on in a big way, and we have our local affiliates and our state affiliates who have actually received grant money from the NEA to actually implement some of this work, so the professional development piece. But we're not stopping there. We believe, and we have research to support this, that those teachers who go on to advanced certification through the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, they have the greatest impact, especially for marginalized students. And so we're supporting that continuing growth and development of our teachers. I mentioned before that our support professionals are an integral part of surrounding our whole students with the support they need. And so we also implemented what we call our professional growth continuum for our education support professionals, and we're providing them with the professional development they need to be better educators for our students. And then we know that we cannot possibly do this alone. We took on accountability a few years ago, and as we listened to our educators, what we heard them say is that really accountability is about making sure that all students and all educators and all schools are excelling and everyone knows it. That's what it's about. And for that to happen, we've got to embed this work that we've been learning about today in everything we do, And so we, last year, took on the work around community schools, because we know that we cannot and we don't want to do this by ourselves, that it has to be a system of shared responsibility for our students. And so we know that we have to mine the assets of our communities. If we're going to meet the social and emotional needs of our kids, if we're going to make sure that every one of our students has what they need when they need it, all of us have to come together to make sure that happens. We've got to make sure that our students not only understand that they have agency, but they've got to learn how to use that agency, how to develop it, how to become the leaders we need them to be. Pristina, was she not fabulous? Oh my goodness. We could not agree more. You're not our future. You are our present. We need leaders like her in every school, in every state, across this country. And we can't, it's not going to just happen. We've got to make it happen. And then finally, we at the NEA feel very strongly about partnerships. And so we are really digging into what we call labor management collaboration. As a union and as management, we often are on different sides. But I heard somebody say this earlier, if we put students at the core, then we can work out those differences. If we come together with shared decision-making, all of us, then we will do what's best for our students. I will leave you with this. Of all the civil rights for which this world has fought and died for 5,000 years, the right to learn is undoubtedly the most fundamental. The freedom to learn has been bought by bitter sacrifice. So whatever you might think about the curtailment of other civil rights, you must fight to the last ditch to keep open the right to learn. Those profound words by W.E.B. Du Bois captures the magnitude of the responsibility every one of us in this room has to make sure that every one of our babies has what they need when they need it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark, let me ask you to talk a little bit about what's happening in urban communities, and particularly the things that your organization is focused on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me try to paint this picture, because I think in thinking about this, we often think about the role of K through 12, the role of community colleges and maybe VOTEC schools, and the role of four-year colleges and universities. I think, and I would ask all of you, to elevate the role of community-based providers. Community-based providers. So we function as a community-based provider. As a community-based provider, we provide after-school, high-quality after-school programs that are run by paid professionals, many of them who are educators, that have a curriculum and an instructional model or a support services model around them. Community-based providers are essential to accomplishing the goals of this commission. Secondly, and related to that, we function as a community-based provider of workforce services. Workforce services. There are many people who are not prepared to go to a community college. They either did not finish high school on a timely basis. They may have had some, if you will, interaction with the criminal justice system. They're not prepared to go to a community college. But they do want skills. They do want to enhance their ability to work. Community-based providers fill that niche and fill that gap. We have over 200,000 people across the nation who participate in our workforce development and job training programs. They're funded by the federal government, state governments, county governments, and the private sector. Ditto for our after-school programs. Our after-school programs function in much the same way, funded by private dollars and some federal, state, and local dollars and foundation dollars. The sophistication of after-school programs run by high-quality providers has advanced significantly in the last 15 to 20 years. Same thing for workforce services. I am saying this not to suggest that community colleges or VOTEC schools should not be part of the emphasis. I'm saying this because when you're dealing with people that have multiple barriers, challenges, when your focus is on equity, many times community-based providers like the National Urban League and its network of 90 affiliates across the nation have trust, are located in the community, don't come across like a big institution with bureaucracies and offices and red tape, but come across as being customer-centric or people-centric, come across as being trusted, come across as being, for many of them, a bridge. What we try to do with many of our workforce services, we try to bridge people into certificate programs, community colleges, or four-year colleges. That's the objective, is to get them a skill. Of course, some people come through our programs and go immediately to work. But our goal is to push them on a continuum of education. So in this discussion, and I know we've got policymakers in here, and I think that's why I'm emphasizing this, that intermediaries and community-based organizations, which exist in every community across the nation, we happen to be unique because we're a national network of community-based providers. And there are only a handful of national networks. Many of them are, if you will, standalones. They operate in a local community or they may operate regionally. So we are heavily focused on enhancing the breadth, the depth, the size, the scale of all of our after-school, out-of-school time initiatives, and the same thing with workforce. We also are available to do something that I really like, and we do it in a handful of communities, and that is works directly with a specific business to do a customized training program. We've done it in Florida for the Marriott Corporation to prepare people to work in their kitchens by getting them certificates in the culinary arts. We've worked with major cable providers to assist them in helping people become cable installers. And we like that kind of work because it's very focused, very specific on a particular employer, a particular set of skills that that employer believes they need. And if that employer says we want them to get this certificate, or we don't even care if they have a certificate, we just want them to get the skills that we need, we can work directly with them on the design and the development of a curriculum. So your community-based providers are more nimble. Tell you what, we're also on a per capita basis less expensive, and we move without a whole lot of bureaucracy. So in the discussion about how to implement this, we've got to talk about pre-K, K through 12, community college, VOTEC, and four-year schools. But we've also got to add, because I think it's an important element, community-based providers. We at the National Urban League tend to be better recognized for our advocacy voice, better known mainly inside the Beltway for our advocacy voice. But the real soul of our organization, the real heart of our organization, is through what our affiliates do at the local level. And what I do in my work is we raise money and distribute it to those affiliates. We design programs as sort of a venture operation and implement them through our affiliates. So I want to really, really raise that up, because in our world, we serve about 1.5 million people across all programs. 75% of them are African American, 25% of them are everyone else. We serve whites, we serve Latinos, we serve Asians, we serve Native Americans, depending on the community where we are. So we're focused heavily on the African American community, but not exclusively on the African American community through all the programmatic work that we do across the nation. So I would just, offer that as a thought, because the conversation now is how do we implement, how do we execute, how do we push these? And it's going to take a symphony, it's going to take an orchestra, it's going to take everyone in the band to sort of play a role. And I want to make sure that the community-based providers are in the band and not in the stands.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. So we're quickly wrapping out of time here, but in very few words, they take 10 seconds. What are you most energized about of what you've heard today? Josh?
Well, more than 10 seconds, but not much more. Let me say first, before I say what I'm energized about, let me say that I want to be sure I haven't sugarcoated the situation from the standpoint of business. The reason why an overwhelming plurality of our members listed labor as their biggest headwind is that they can't find the workers that they need. The workers that they're looking for, they can find people, they can't find people who are prepared both technically and with the soft skills needed to join their workforce. And so here's what I'm energized about, and that is the focus on the soft skill, because almost all of our employers can give some technical training. Most of them are looking for somebody with some STEM skills and so on, but they can bring somebody up if they have the soft skills of discipline, of punctuality, of communication, and so on. And so what I'm energized about is Mark Morial just gave a great example of it, of programs that are done in combination with community leaders of all kinds, government, urban league, and businesses working together to provide programs that give our kids the soft skills they need to be the productive employees that we know they can be.
Excellent. Thank you. Becky, quickly.
I am energized that we're putting our students at the core of this work. I am so excited that not only the report itself and how that was, it was so comprehensive and so well structured, but this event, that we had all of the voices, all of the stakeholders up here on this stage and in the audience committing to doing this work together, that we have in our hands an opportunity to go back to our states and our locals and make them rewrite their ESSA plans, right? We have it now. We have the research. We have the evidence. We've been saying it for years, but thank you, Linda, and all of the rest of the members of this commission for giving us this report. This is power, and together we will be worthy of our students.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So,
10 words, 3 words, 2 words?
quickly.
I'll just say quickly, not to directly answer the question. Question before all of us is, can we mount the energy on the implementation and execution side?
Right.
It's a difficult battle on multiple fronts, and can we hold together this cross-section, which includes teachers and business and community providers across the board to push sensible, if you will, change. What's exciting about this is that this is the next generation of education reform with excellence and equity as its guiding principles. That's what this is.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I'm energized by the passion and commitment of all of you, and I think we're a wrap. So thank you all for
Thank you, Jorge.
Please welcome the channel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is good. Thank you. I bet you. I will. I'm going to give it to you.
To conclude today's event, please welcome back to the stage Commission Co-Chair Tim Shriver.
Good afternoon. Are you still awake? Ladies and gentlemen, you've lived it, you've seen it, you've heard it, you've studied it, you've been entertained by it, inspired by it, I hope challenged by it. We are officially at the finish line of this event and the starting line of a new generation. I'm going to do my short selection. I hope everybody has a list of all those moments in which this day has caused you to rethink and challenge and hopefully engage in a whole new way of thinking. I'll start right with Pristina, who got up here, Albanian, Muslim, Mexican, Catholic, American, who said it's getting into people's hearts. It's getting into people's hearts. Does that sound like your story? Do you feel, did you hear teachers talking about keeping kids alive? Does that get into your heart? Did you hear about cooperation, about transcending boundaries, about addressing the yeah buts, about brains and policies and relationships, about having 2x10s? I hope people will go out of here remembering when they need to have a 2x10, maybe with someone in your own family. I hope you remember the words we started with from young people. The lyric, "Rise Up." Some of you may feel like you walk out of here and think, well, I'm too small, or I don't have a big platform, or I don't have a big budget, or the world is too tough, or the world is too imposing, or the forces against us are too strong. But if there's one thing this report is saying to each and every one of us, and if you heard it, mostly from the voices of young people, you can't listen to that voice that says you can't do it. You cannot listen to the voice that says the obstacles are too high. You cannot listen to the voices that tell you we have to accept the status quo. And even if your voice is small, and even if your peer group is limited, and even if you don't think one school, one classroom, one school district, one state is enough, you have to leave here, I believe, committed to an alternate future. I think to myself as we gather here today of how many millions of young people will go home tonight and turn on the news. Here's an example of what they're likely to see in today's USA Today. The headlines include these words: shutdown, death more likely by opioids, sex crimes, Armageddon. And our little 8-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 16-year-olds are going to walk home tonight, and a lot of them will find the TVs on in their house, and this is what they're going to hear. This is what they're going to see. This is what they think we're content to give them. Now, I don't know whether you need to hear it at church or whether you need to hear it deep in your soul, the words I started with, the sound of the genuine that Howard Thurman invited young people to hear in themselves. I don't know if you need to hear it by looking or seeing into the eyes of your own children, your own loved ones. I don't know if you need to look at the obstacles ahead of us and find it there, but wherever it is, you need to hear it. I hope you will listen and know that there are others like you. Colleagues, partners, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts. We have the grandfathers of this movement. We're very lucky to have them in our presence. We have Dr. Roger Weisberg. We have Dr. James P. Comer, people who have spent 40, 50, 60 years hoping, praying, working 12, 14, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week over decades, trying to get us to this moment. Trying to reinforce the idea that, yes, people will respond if the science is there, if the practice is there, if the good ideas are there, if the people of goodwill are there. They've spent their whole lives, and we thank them. We thank Roger. We thank Jim. But we also know there are mothers, not just grandparents, but there are mothers and fathers and uncles and aunts. We heard from so many of them today. Business leaders, scientists, the whole range. And what else do we need? You know, because if we're waiting for someone else to give us anything more, I don't think it's coming. So I want to invite Linda Darling-Hammond and Jorge Benitez and Dr. James P. Comer back onto the stage, my fellow co-chairs, and together we are, yeah, come on up. Where's Linda? Don't tell me she left. She missed my whole pitch? No, she's coming. So I want you to join me in thanking our leaders for their work. I'm going to ask Roger, come on, you come up here too, and we're going to, what I want you to know, yeah, come on up here, Dr. Weisberg. Come on up here. Yeah, let's hear it for Roger. Ow, ow! I want you to know that this cover of USA Today that I just quoted you from has a back page. And guess what's on the back page? A Nation at Hope. All right? So there's two headlines. There's two stories. There's two versions of the future. Here's one. Here's the other. And you look up on this screen and you will see the declaration that is in the newspaper today. And if we scroll through this slowly, we'll take another hour so you can see all of the organizations, but we'll scroll through quickly. All of the organizations and people and philanthropists and educators and business leaders and civil rights leaders and human justice pursuers, all walks of life who are up on this screen, who have signed this declaration. And I tell you, if you leave it at signing, you have only yourself to blame. But you will walk out of here, and I want to ask our young people to come out now, because you're going to listen to them one last time. Come on, Eastern Senior Choir. You're going to listen. Yeah, come on out. Come on out. I want you to listen now. I don't want you to let these words go unnoticed. Heather Evans and Trinaya Battle are the soloists that will sing us out of this room. But as they sing, my last invitation is that you will hear it deep in your heart, that you will let your hearts be turned as the young people have asked us to, and that we will marshal the voices of young people, not just today, but every day going forward to change the future and to create a nation at hope. Young people, take it away.
broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. You feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. We can walk it out and move. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the wave, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you. For you, for you, for you, for you, for you, for you. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up in spite of the ache, and I will rise 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the wave, I'll rise up in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. And I'll rise up for you. I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up in spite of the ache, and I will rise 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, high like the wave, I'll rise up in spite of the ache, and I will rise 1,000 times again.